Okay, shalom everyone. I am back. We hadn't had some classes for a while. Let me think. I think the last time I was on live was before Pesach, a few hours before the holiday, when we did the meditations for the Seder. By the way, there was really cool classes. Now we're going to go right back and jump back into it. I'm going to take you back to a discourse we've been learning Thursday nights for 4 classes we gave on this discourse, but I told you it's a very rich and long and complex and incredible discourse, and it was a Purim discourse. So I'm still going to hold on to Purim, and we're going to complete it either this week or maybe do one more week. It's quite possible. This mimer is in the Mittler Rebbe from the second Chabad Rebbe. The mimer is in the book Sharei Ora, and on page 50, it starts on page 54. Not 54. It starts on page Nun Dalid, which Nun Dalid is 54, but in the actual numbers in the book, the page is the first side of page 108. They make these books a little strange that they put on one page, they put a number, and the other page they put a Hebrew alphabet, and it's not the same. And that's the way they do it. Why? I don't know. It should at least be the same, but that's the way it is. I know what's going on. The numbers are the numbers from the beginning of the book, and why is that? Because the numbers, they're actually doubling it. They're skipping the 2. Okay, I'm getting it. But it's still a little weird. So this is the book, Sharei Ora. This particular discourse is called Yavi'u Levush Malchus, which is something that Haman said when he was trying to pump up himself, where he thought the king wants to honor him. And he said, let them bring, this is in the book of Esther, and he said, let them make a parade and honor him, make a whole fancy situation for him. And little did he know that this was really going to be an honoring of Mordechai. Fine. So we spent 4 long classes delving very deep into these various items that Haman had asked for. One of them was the garment of the king. The other one was the horse that the king rode on during his inauguration, and in which the crown was placed on his head. So even though it doesn't mention specifically that he asked for 3 things, but he's alluding to that he wants the crown as well. That's, by the way, the reason why Achashverosh, the king at that time, started getting a little jittery, a little nervous. Because when one of your servants is asking to wear your crown, that kind of can get a person a little bit unnerved, especially when you see that he's communicating with the queen a lot. So you're wondering and you're scared for a conspiracy over here or for some kind of an assassination attempt. So that's why Achashverosh was getting nervous from this. And this is the way that's why he was very happy on the right moment to say, hang him up on the gallows. Everything was like perfect. We learned how this all means in the spiritual dynamics. So initially, when I set out to learn this discourse, I said I would like to finish 23 chapters. The discourse itself has over 90 chapters, 97 chapters. I wanted to finish 23. Why? Because 23 covers the main idea of the discourse, and then he goes and he delves deeper. We are holding now we did 19 chapters, and we're left with 20, 21, 22, and 23, which is a perfect amount to study today. It's not that complicated. It's not too long. Doable. So this was going to be class number 5, and this was going to be the conclusion of what we were learning. However, peeking a little further, I realized that the next few chapters are still learnable, meaning part of we can connect it. Chapter 30 is where he actually says, and to understand the root of the matter, let's go much into the root of the matter. So those who are familiar with these Thursday night classes know that the Alter Rebbe, his father, has two different types of discourses. There is an original discourse, and then there is a second discourse, which is commentary on the first discourse, in which he probes the mystical Kabbalistic ideas that are the underlying precepts that develop the discourse. And those usually start with these words, Lahavin Sharei shel hadvarim, to understand the root of the matter. So since he puts this only after chapter 29, which means by chapter 30, I would say that the first 29 chapters are all the discourse itself. From chapter 30 begins the commentary on the discourse, the more Kabbalistic, mystical commentary on the discourse, which, now, the Mittler Rebbe wrote this book, but this is really an explanation on his father's discourse in Torah Or. In the book of Torah Or, which is Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi's, the author of the Balatanya's Maimer, over there he has a discourse, and there too he has a discourse, and then he has explanation on the discourse. But as we know, his son, the Mittler Rebbe, his contribution to the Hasidic doctrine or to the philosophy of Hasidism is he takes his father's discourses, which are, concentrated, and he opens them up and he expounds and expands on them enormously. So in this Sefer, he's really expounding on his father's discourse, on a few of his father's discourses. One of the longest ones is this one that he does. And again, he has 97 chapters. But he combines his father's discourse and his father's explanation on the discourse into. So it seems like the junction is after chapter 29. And so this would be considered as we learning the commentary of the son on his father's discourse, on the original discourse. The commentary on it, we're not going to do. But that's going to take us another 3 months to get to the end. Not that that's bad, but I'm just saying not 3 months, probably another 2 months of continuous Thursday night study. We want to do other things, so we'll do that. Now, the reason I got to this to begin with was because one of the only memorim in Torah Or that I didn't teach yet is his father's, the Alter Rebbe's discourse, Yavi'u Levush Malchus. Now, I taught the Yavi'u Levush Malchus, but I did not teach the commentary on it, the Alter Rebbe's commentary. The Biur I didn't teach. And I was learning it and I couldn't put together heads and tails. So I said I got to learn his son's discourse, who expounds much more. So really what we really need to learn is from chapter 30 to the end. That's really the part that we need to learn. The other part was really a review and an expansion on something that we learned already years ago. Not that anybody remembers. But it's there already in the stratosphere. But we'll see. Maybe we'll do it next year, Purim. That will be way after Mashiach is here. We'll have a lot more time. Bezrat Hashem. So I'm going to take you to where we're holding now. We're holding now on page 122. And it is Perek Chof. Anybody that wants to know what's flying today, stop this YouTube. Go listen to 10 hours of earlier study. And then you'll be up to speed where we are. So Yitzchak, if you need help, you can go into the other room, come back in 10 hours from now, and you'll be ready. Where we're holding. We're all pumped up. We're all like at mile marker, we're far in. Okay. I'm not going to review, just because I don't even remember what we learned either. No, that's not the that's not the reason why we're not going to review. I'm not going to review because it's a lot to review. I'm just going to say the tiniest points, which some of you don't believe me. You'll say, oh, come on, I'll take 2 hours. No, I am. He's explaining the spiritual dynamics of these items. And he explained just briefly, for those of you who were with us in the earlier classes, that since Purim was the reenactment of the giving of the Torah, so when Haman is asking for all these items, there is a deep secret in his words. He's a lowlife. He's a wicked, power-hungry politician, and evil, whatever, despicable person. But since the story is written based on divine inspiration, there is a godly story going along over here, and the godly story interprets all these things as it is in the divine realm, not as it plays out in the human spectrum and the human reality down here. It's almost like we're reading it as a metaphor for some. That doesn't mean the story was a metaphor. The story literally happened. But at the same time that it literally happened, the physical events in this world was metaphoric for the spiritual aspects that were going on, and ultimately for the divine aspects. And the discourse shares with us all the divinity of the story. So the reason why on Purim we're asking for these 3 items: the garment of the king. So the king over here is God. The garment of God, the horse that God wore during his coronation, and the crown. So we learned at great length. In the first class, we learned all the way in the beginning of the class, what is the significance of the garment the king wore by the coronation, Levush Malchus, which we explained means the garment of the Or Ein Sof, the Malchut element. God himself garbs himself in a garment of kingship. But this kingship is the kingship higher than before the Tzimtzum. It's that God emanates the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, that which is Sovev, that which encompasses all worlds. That's called Levush. That's the garment. And we can only tap that. I'm just going to review just a few ideas, so it's just that it rings a bell and you get excited, like for what we learned already. We can only tap that level, that lofty level, through a physical mitzvah. And he explained the reason is because physicality is created by the Sovev light. And we had a long discussion on that. Only physicality, not the spiritual worlds. Only physicality. In order for the somethingness of everything, we had a whole long discussion. Listen to class number 1 in order to understand this. That only the bringing about of the physicality and the limitations and the definitions of the world, what we might consider as the least and the most unimpressive elements of existence, is actually coming from the highest, most omnipotent, most limitless aspects of God's energy. So physicality has that incredible connection to the Or Ein Sof, to the infinite light, to this level called Malchus of Ein Sof. However, the physicality itself, although any physical item, this plastic cup is a derivative. Who's responsible for it? That lofty level of the infinite light, the garment of the king. However, physicality blocks its origins and therefore is disconnected from the very force that's responsible to create it. Physicality blocks that force. So when I'm holding on to something physical, I'm not grabbing and I'm not connecting to via the physical to that transcendental infinite light. But in a mitzvah, the physical is expressing that its own source from where the physical comes from. So any spiritual type of holy service of God will not capture it. The recipe has to be two things that go into the recipe over here to be able to connect to this lofty level of the garment. You need something physical, but you need a physical that's not blocking but revealing. But the very definition of physical is that it blocks. Only when you fashion a physical item to be a mitzvah, that's when it expresses its lofty origins. And what's the origins? The garment of the king. Why is it? It's stemming from the infinite desire of God to want to be a king. But the reason it's called the garment, because God's the infinite, the level of the infinite is infinite. So he's everything. There cannot be anything that's not him. So if his infinity would be expressed as is, without a garment, then it would just be him. So he has to be a king. The whole notion of kingship is a garment, a hiding of his truth, a blocking of his. We're still talking on the level of the infinite, the desire of the infinite to be a king, camouflaging and hiding his exclusivity, his absolute exclusivity, to allow the physical to exist and express his kingship. So it's a garment. So through the fashioning of a mitzvah, we tap that level. So when did we gain access to such a lofty level of godliness, to wear God's robe? When the mitzvahs were given to us at Sinai. However, since our acceptance of the Torah at Sinai was mediocre, was half of an acceptance, it wasn't completed. The full completion of the acceptance of the Torah happened on Purim. So therefore, in the Purim story, all the elements of Sinai show up, including this access to God's garment. Now, God produced this garment, so to speak, garbed himself in this garment when he created the world. Because that's when he decided he wants to be a king and manifest his kingship through creation. That's when he dressed in the garment. But when did we get access to that garment? That's by the giving of the Torah. And further, we get access to it completely when we completed our Torah acceptance, which is on Purim. So that's why we say on Purim that we get access to that garment. Now we learned, in addition to the garment, again, this is a brief review. In addition to the garment, there's also the crown. The crown is much deeper than the garment of kingship. In the Ein Sof itself, the garment is the Malchus of the Ein Sof. The kingship, the garment, the cover. Malchut means already a dimming of the light. What's the crown? The crown is the keter of the Ein Sof. What's that? The pleasure that God has in being a king. There is the kingship itself. The kingship itself is already a certain compromise on his infinity because he's making room for somebody to be a king over. But on the level of pleasure of that kingship, it's all about him, inside of him, and there's nothing other than him. And it's the deepest, most quintessential element within his essence. And when do we access that? We access that not when we fashion a mitzvah, but when we do the mitzvah, which means we were just learning these laws in Maimonides and Rambam the other day, just yesterday or the day before yesterday. I think it was the day before yesterday. There is one thing when you prepare a mitzvah. For example, you're writing a pair of tefillin, or you're writing a mezuzah. And it's another thing when you're taking that mezuzah and you're doing the mitzvah by fixing it on the door. Or you can build a sukkah, which is creating the entity of a mitzvah. Or you can bake the matzah. So you created the entity of a non-leavened bread, which is kosher for Passover. It's kosher for the mitzvah. But that's not the mitzvah yet. The mitzvah is to eat the matzah on Pesach, on Passover by night. The mitzvah is to sit in a sukkah on sukkahs. So the garment is already accessed when we fashion the mitzvah, when we make it, because we're expressing already God in the physical. But when are we really, really stimulating his pleasure? When we're doing with it what he wants, and the wants is an expression of his pleasure. The want is based on his pleasure. Why in heaven's name does he have pleasure from us crunching a cracker? I don't know. You got to ask him why he finds that pleasurable. But that's his will, and that's his pleasure. Obviously, there is infinite and incomprehensible secrets of what this means to God. But that's when we access not just the Malchut, but the Keser Malchus, which is not even possible in any way to equate. So much deeper. And on Purim, we got that as well. Because because we received the Torah and committed to the doing of the mitzvah, not just to the fashioning of the mitzvahs. And then we came to the last discussion, which we had in the last class. What's the significance of the horse? So we discussed in the earlier class, I'm going to give you a brief memory. This was in class number 4. We discussed the idea that God goes soaring at night through the sages ask, it gives us God's schedule during the day, and then it says at night, what does God do? So it says that he soars through, he hops onto his cherub, and he soars through 18,000 worlds. One of the classic statements of the Talmud that is like really, really mysterious. So we discussed that the whole channel of God coming down, descending, that during the day, we activate all the Sephirot in the world of Atzilus, which is purely divine. That's during the day, through our service and so forth. We draw God's light. We create, so to speak, the structure of the attributes, which is the skeleton, so to speak, of the entire cosmic order, but still in a divine place where everything is infinite. We build the entire pipelines that connect the infinite to the actual creation. That's during the day. During the night, those very same energies that were in a purely divine construction during the day gets transported into the world of finitude, into the world of angels, into the world of limitation. And that process is taking God from his world into our world. For that, he needs a vehicle. Just like a person travels, when you're staying in your own surroundings, you can walk around the block. You don't need a vehicle. When do you need a vehicle? If you're going out to the countryside, you're going at a distance, which is not really walkable, then you're going to hop on to a car, a bus, a train, a plane, a boat, whatever it is, it's going to take you to a distance. So taking God to a distance, what's called distant from God, to the realm of the finite, to the creations. So to transport God on, God does that because he channels his light down into creation in the nighttime. And then so that's the meaning of going on a cherub. 18,000 worlds, he explains why 18,000 connecting to the 18 vertebrae. During the day, we daven Shemona Esrei. It's coming back to me as I'm teaching now. I forgot it all. It's crazy. You learn it and then you forget. But then when you start rereading it, it starts coming back. So remember, we're learning during the day, during our prayer, Shemona Esrei, we say the 18 blessings. We're actually constructing God's body. I know this sounds like I'm a heretic saying this. We construct God's body. But yeah, mystically we do that. Because God is beyond the body. He's beyond a definitive, vessels and definitions. God made it our task to actually create him a body. So during the daytime, we create the body, and the body is the entire construct of the sphirot, of the attributes. That's the body. But when we translate that lower into the lower worlds, it's 18,000 worlds. From the 18 vertebrae of God, it becomes 18,000 worlds as it's descending to a much lower place. But what do we get from, what was the general gist that we got? The general gist that we got over here is that there is the concept of a cherub, a vehicle. Once we understand the vehicle, now we'll understand that just like God has cherubs, he also has horses. And at times he rides on a horse. And he explained the difference between the cherub and the horse. The horses are higher than the cherubs. The influence that God influences the world, that's part of the created influence. The created influence is coming through a cherub. But the channel and the couriers and the vehicles that God uses when he wants to reveal a much deeper side of himself, a higher side of himself, he rides on horses. And that's why by the giving of the Torah, we're here as well, God came down. Not like every night he comes down to a certain degree to feed, to sustain the worlds. But there's two types of sustenance. He can sustain the world with just sustenance. But he can also sustain the world with something. He's gifting the world with a higher godly knowledge. That's the Torah. But since he's transporting it into our realm, he uses the vehicles. The vehicles are the horses. And as we discussed, that really the letters that are used, the words that God uses, words are called horses, through which all the godliness is descends. By the giving of the Torah, God particularly brought his Torah down, his infinite wisdom, his infinite mind. He brought it into a comprehensible, into a language, into a human language, into a created, into a finite language. And yet it contains this infinite wisdom. So that's the meaning that God came riding on horses. Now let's go back to the story of Purim. Since by Purim we re-accepted the Torah and completed the giving of the Torah, the horses as well showed up. And that's the reason why Haman is the one who says he's preparing the whole Purim story. So Haman is the one who says, let's get the horse, let's get the garment, let's get the crown. Although he had no idea while he was doing it that he himself was calling forth all the powerful godly revelations that was going to make up the holiday of Purim. He in his statement was laying out the entire request from God. He was sending God a message of what he needs to create Purim for the Jewish people, unbeknown to him. He needs, and like you see in the story, that he created a parade for Mordechai, not for himself. As he thought he's asking it for himself, it ended up being Mordechai's, and we are all Mordechai. So that's why it's important also when we shouldn't get frazzled by the anti-Semites that we see today in the colleges and all this, because they're just preparing a huge, big holiday for the Jewish people. If they would only know that, to see if my words get out to them, they would right away run out and they would vacate and there wouldn't be any more protests. But if they only learned from history, they should know that. here's the thing. We'll say it in short. From Pharaoh and the entire ancient Egyptians, the only thing that's left is matzah balls in our soup. From Haman and the entire Amaleks, we have hamantashen that's left over. From the Greeks and the entire Greek kingdom, we have latkes. Whoever doesn't know what that is, they are amazing potato pancakes, latkes and donuts. So we do really well with our enemies. So if they would only know that they're going to end up on our plate one day, then they would probably stop now. But that's the reality with the Jewish people. I'm not afraid to say it. I'm saying it to everybody. We are undefeatable and we are indistinguishable. Because just like you cannot erase God, you can't erase us. We are here to stay forever. If you mess with us, you end up in our soup. That's just the way it works. I wish they cut this piece and make a short of it, put it out. In any case, so that's we see on the deep story. We read about it over here. So now let's go. So now the question is, the real deeper question is, since we're talking about such high, lofty levels of godliness, how come it took Haman to reach it? Why is Haman the one asking for these things? How can it be that it's such a wicked lowlife is reaching up and asking for this? Of course, it was in his subconscious. I mean, he wasn't even conscious of it. It was words that he was using that were consistent with but the very fact that they chose Haman to say these words from above means that he's the right guy to get the key to bring to the stable, to get the horse, to get God's horse out. How does Haman have those keys? That's the question. How does he have access to the king's wardrobe to get out the king's garment that the king wore during the coronation? So that's what he's going to explain. Yes, that there is a connection to Haman. It's not just because the Jewish people needed it and it's funny and it's humorous when Haman is the one who ends up bringing it to us, but rather it's because he, as wicked as he is connected in some weird way to this very lofty level. Because when we study Hasidism, there's always surprises. So let's see. Chapter 20. However, we still need to understand because of this, that it says Vayikach Haman es Levush, that it was Haman who took the garment. Vesasus, and he was the one who took the horse. It's not only that he asks for it, the king tells him to go take it. And he is the one who has to go. He goes to the stable and gets the horse. And he's the one who goes and gets the garment. So it means if the physical story is a physical incarnation of the godly event, that means that Haman is the one who's accessing God's stable to take out that horse. How does he have access to that, to the king's private horse? Someone is low on him. That's the question. The Luchud is a Pella Gadol. This is something that is a great wonder. Since the garment of the king and the crown of the king are such high levels, as we said earlier, where did Haman merit that he should be the one that will garb Mordechai? Okay, he's bringing it for Mordechai, but how does he have that? It would seem like if Mordechai would have wanted it, Mordechai couldn't get it. He needs Haman to go get it for him. That Haman should take the garment and he should take the horse. Where does Haman have a grasp? Levush Malchus elyon, in the supernal garment of kingship. This is higher than all worlds, higher than all levels of divinity. This reaches all the way into the Or Ein Sof, into the infinite light that's before the original contraction. How in the world does Haman get there? And how does he get to the horses that the king is riding on? Until it says that it says that it was Haman that went and he took as a Levush, that he gained access to this garment. However, the answer to that is, the sages say, the sages say, if we search for Haman and we search for him in the Torah, where will we find him? So what do you mean where we'll find him? We'll find him in the Megillah, in the book of Esther. No, the sages are asking, where do we find him in the 5 books of Moshe? Where do we find him in the Chumash itself? How do they call it? The Pentateuch. Did I say it correctly? The 5 books. Where do we find him because we know everything that is later in Torah, even the prophets and the writings, are all sourced in the Torah itself. So, and it's interesting that they don't ask it regarding all the other biblical figures who we find appearing later. They don't say Samson. Where do we find Samson in the Torah? Shimshon. Or where do we find, I don't know, let's take anybody else, Samuel in the Torah. Or Eli, the Kohen. Or all these people. Jeremiah, where do we find him in the Torah? Sages don't ask that. But when it comes to all the players by the Purim story, the sages want to know, where is Esther in the Torah? Where is Haman in the Torah? Where is Mordechai in the Torah? They ask all these questions. It's interesting, they don't say where is Achashverosh. But Esther, Haman, and Mordechai, the sages all ask, where do you find them in the Torah? So Esther, they say it's because it says, I will hide my face. So the word used for hiding is Vanechi astir, which means, astir means to hide, and it has the same connotation of Esther, which means to hide, concealment. Mordechai, we learned earlier, they find them in the spices. The Torah says you should make certain type of spices, take wild myrrh, and wild myrrh, the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Targum is Mira Dachya. So Mira Dachya is Mordechai. So we explained that already in one of the earlier classes, what the relationship with that is. In this series, class number 2, we had a discussion of what that means. But now we're going to approach the third one. The sages say, where is Haman in the Torah? And they say, guess what? We found them. They find them in God's conversation with Adam immediately after they sinned and they ate from the tree of knowledge. God says to Adam, where are you? How come I can't find you? And Adam says, I'm hiding because I'm naked. So he was uncomfortable with himself. So God says, who told you you're naked? As explained, the sages explain, meaning, why are you uncomfortable with your nakedness? That's only because you have evil inclination. Had you not have Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, then you wouldn't be self-conscious. And you would be able to, because before I had conversations, you were naked, you weren't running anywhere. Suddenly you're uncomfortable. And then God says, did you eat from the tree I told you not to eat? The words the Torah uses is Hamin ha'etz. From the tree, Hamin ha'etz. Was it from the tree that I told you not to eat from? Did you eat? So the word Hamin is Haman. It's just from the tree. It's a question. From that tree, did you eat? Hamin, the sages say, that's Haman. Now we can understand that we're basically, where are we finding Haman? In the original sin. Well, that's a pretty appropriate place for him. He's obviously not rooted in a good place. because he's an evil monster. He was the first one who ever wanted to bring an entire Holocaust on the Jewish people. So we know that evil is a product of sin. Sin produces evil. Evil creates sin, but the more sinning there is, the more evil there is. So the fact that Haman can be it's a derivative from the sins that were done, which causes a blockage on God. The blockage of God allows evil to fester and to develop. So when you're looking for Haman, you'll find him in the original sin, which that can produce. And where was the sin? And particularly the sin was coming from. It seems like the sin wasn't only in the act, the sin was in the tree itself. Because God says this is a tree of knowledge of good and evil. That means the tree itself has knowledge of good and evil in it. So there is already the beginnings of evil. The seeds of evil are in the tree. And Haman is connected to that tree. Okay. So now, once we know that, let's explore that a little better. And once we'll understand that, we'll understand why Haman is connected to such a high place. What's his real story here? It says, "I'm in a that from the tree that I commanded you not to eat, did you eat? The Inyan who, and the idea is as follows. It says in the verse, Reishis Goyim Amalek. It says about the Amalek, the Amalek people, the nation of Amalek, which is Amalek was a great grandson of Esav, who later turns in to be the symbol of evil in the world. The Amalekites are the people who God says are my everlasting enemies. Their entire existence is to fight me. And God therefore commands the Jewish people to erase them and eradicate them completely from the face of the earth. So, regarding Amalek, it says, where does it say? A Gentile prophet, Bilam, who was hired by the king of Moab to curse the Jewish people in Numbers. You read the story. So Bilam was a wicked man. And when Bilam concludes his holy download of blessings, he intended to bring curses, but God made blessings come through his mouth. When he concluded all of those blessings, and he was and the king Balak, who hired him, was so upset and angry at him, sent him back home. He said, "Let me leave you with a couple of lasting prophecies." And Balak should have told him, "No, I don't want to hear another word anymore." But it wasn't meant to be, so he listened. And in those prophecies, he prophesies Mashiach. He drops the Mashiach. The highest, greatest things, the highest blessings yet to come happened when he was already leaving. When he was ready, one foot out the door. He turns around to Balak and he delivers the last prophecies. So he delivers the prophecies of what's going to happen to the Jewish people in the end of days. But he also speaks what's going to happen to Amalek. And he says about the Amalekites, he says, Reishis Goyim Amalek. Amalek is the beginning of nations. Va'acharisai, but his end, he's the beginning, and his end is to be obliterated. Adei ove, to be obliterated. Which means Amalek has a beginning and he has an end. His beginning, he is the beginning of all nations. What does that mean? He is the root. He is the root of every element that is not good within the nations. We're going to learn in a few moments that the nations present a challenge on godliness. Humanity in general, after the sin, is a challenge on godliness. But the challenge is a challenge, and in the end, it's rectified. The nations are rectified. But Amalek is the beginning, it's the seed of all evil that's in all nations. And therefore, Amalek cannot be rectified. And Amalek is destroyed. That's the meaning of the verse. The beginning of nations is Amalek. And what's his hope? What is he looking forward to? Total obliteration. Although we're going to learn in the Mimer that there is some remedy to Amalek as well. That there's some element of Amalek which actually could be elevated, which is what we're going to actually be learning about. But first we know that Amalek is called the beginning. He's going to explore now, why is Amalek called the beginning of nations? By calling him the beginning of the nations, we are doing two things. Number one, we're connecting Amalek to the nations. If you're saying the beginning of something means it's connected. But on the other hand, you're separating him from everybody else because he's the beginning. So there is all the nations, and usually the beginning of something means it's above them. It's like a whole. It's like the firstborn. Firstborn is special. It's far more powerful. You see in Egypt that God killed the firstborn, and by killing the firstborn of Egypt, he destroyed Egypt. He weakened it completely. Because the firstborn has extra powers. It says the main power of the father goes into the firstborn. That's why, according to Torah, the firstborn receives double portion of the inheritance. Because he has more power from the dad, from the father. So, but by saying someone is the firstborn, on the one hand, he's part of the siblings. But on the other hand, he stands above and beyond all the siblings. So Amalek has a connection to the nations, but he's not counted as part of the nations. He's above the nations. So he's going to explain it. The Yadu'at is known. Shazayin Umois, the 7 nations. Which are the 7 nations? So according to Torah, there are 70 nations. These 70 nations, the 70 root nations. These 70 nations are the nations listed after the flood. In the Torah portion of Noach in Genesis, in the second portion. Over there it discusses the 70 nations. But in addition to this, now, from the 70 nations, there are 7 nations who lived in the land of Canaan, which is later the land that becomes the land of Israel. So we know that the 7 nations, they are the root of the 70. Because every number is complete when it's multiplied by 10. So 7 is a very important number because the primary force that makes up time and space is 7. And everything in the world is created in a manner of 7. Like in time, 7 days in a week. In space, the 6 directions and the center and the middle point. So to 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 seas, 7 musical notes. And the reason everything is primary up of 7 is because the human condition is also structured on 7. There are 7 emotions. This is a very much applicable now because we are in a particular mode of exercise right now when we are working on fixing our 7 emotions. 7 unholy emotions need to be purified and uplifted. Part of the time period that we're in, particularly now, is about character refinement and emotional healing and rectification. The 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot. The 7 weeks of the Omer. We do a count, and every day we're doing rectifications. 7 weeks corresponding to the 7 emotions. Now, these 7 emotions begin in God. God also has 7 emotions. And the 7 emotions is through which he creates the world, through these 7 emotions. Now, from the 7, if you complete it with all its detail, the 7, is each one, a full number is 10. So you have to increase the 7 times, each one times 10, it's 70. So 70 is a more comprehensive number, and 7 is the essence of it, the root of it. So the 70 nations make up the sum totality of humanity. But humanity needs rectification. Because of man fell. As soon as God created the human, Adam and Eve chose and made poor choices, and they fell. They messed themselves up. And it takes now thousands of years of rehabilitation. The rehabilitation is the rehabilitation of the nations. The Jewish people were given the Torah to help mankind rehabilitate. So we're the Israel and the Jewish people, through the Torah, are the counselors and the guides for humanity to transform, to fix, to become ready for the Messianic era. Now, anybody who's your you might say your coach or your counselor or your guide, and is telling you what's wrong with you, and that what needs to be fixing, you don't necessarily love them. So consciously or subconsciously, you see we're in the news all day long. Right? They love pointing the finger to the Jewish people. What kind of monsters we are, what kind of evil we are, what kind of terrible people we are. It's not a new story. This has been going on for thousands of years. We've been accused of being monsters and evil and controllers and okay? But we're doing our job. The world is being rectified. The world is being corrected. The 70 nations. But the root of the fixing of the 70 nations was connected to the Jewish people taking the land of Israel, conquering the land, because the physical conquest, because the 70 nations, each one of them has a representative in the land of Israel, which is like the belly button of the world. So it's like the center, the core of the world, the navel of the world, or call it the brain of the world, whatever you want to call it. It's the center. So, and there lived 7 nations, which were the root of the 70. And by the Jewish people going in to conquer that land, it meant the elevation of the seven primary emotions that make up the human experience, which has been messed up and now needs to be rectified. And that's why, you see, without this these classes, things don't make any sense. If you're trying to make sense of the anti-Semitism, if you want to make sense of what's going on the campuses, why is everything about free Palestine? Free Palestine. That's the land of the 7 nations. That's the land that God gave to Israel. Humanity is terrified of. There's nothing to be scared, because living in a redeemed, rectified state in the time of the redemption is not going to be harmful for anybody. It's going to be the most liberating, blessed state ever. And mankind will thrive and be blessed and experience pleasure and ecstasy and goodness like unbelievable. But it's going to be infused with godly consciousness, and that's its goodness. But if you have evil inclination and you don't want to live in godly consciousness, then the worst thing that can happen is that the Jewish people live in the land of what? Of Israel. And the entire piece, the entire thing, not. And that's why they're screaming free Palestine. These guys sitting all day long on these megaphones, free Palestine. For what I was listening to it this week. I forgot the song. All right? It has nothing to do with the Palestinians. It has to do with the subconscious fear. Some smart agitators know this. They say it. They say it. But that's the truth. We're ready to enter into the Messianic times when we're going to change the experience of the Jewish people are going to experience the very consciousness of humanity. We're not going to force anybody of anything. It's just when the Messianic revelation takes place, the consciousness of humanity automatically is going to be uplifted. And we're all going to become incredibly transparent to the powerful godly life force. And we're all going to become, therefore, devoted to God's will. And our emotions are all going to be lifted up, and if you're to a higher purposeful state. And if our emotions are rectified, then our behavior will become rectified. We're going to be living in a far more selfless state. So that's why you find the weirdest thing, that all these groups that have made it their entire, fervor and passion in this world to corrupt mankind with all kinds of perverted lifestyles, which are opposite of what God wants. I don't care what what people's thoughts. I'm talking about, what does God want? God created a world, and he set the rules and the way he wants people to live. Then the people who decided differently, and they want to mess with the youth, they want to mess with everybody and just make everybody tzudret, everybody meshuga, everybody crazy. So it's interesting. All these student groups and all these, they're all siding with the Palestinians. Although in Islam, they would chop these people's heads off and throw them off buildings. It's funny. I don't know if you saw the news. Iran now invited all these protesters that were expelled from the colleges. Iran invited them now to come to college in Iran. I think it would be an amazing idea. If if they love this Islamic ideas, so why don't all these kids that are, and they can take with them all the rainbow flags, they can take with them all the what do they call it, the drag queens, and all the whole thing. Everybody can move on over to Iran. Let's see how nice and beautiful they'll treat them over there. They want them, and they want to go. They offered them free scholarship. Would be amazing, no? I even saw, this was right after October 7th, that there is a global, not a global, there is a group in England. They're called what do they call it when you have a union. In England, when you have a union, so you have a what's the whole point? A lobby. The unions lobby on behalf of the participants. So there was a union for prostitutes. It's called the Prostitute Union, to help defend prostitutes all over. And they're standing for Gaza. So I'm taking a look and I'm saying, look at this, amazing. If you go through the list, everybody who's siding with them, like, why? The answer is, if you want to keep prostitution going, of course you need Gaza not to be in the end in the hands of Israel. Because when the Jewish people will eventually settle the entire land of Israel and build our temple, a higher consciousness will come to the human race, where all these companies will be out of business. Not because any police will shut them down, because mankind will, from within themselves, our evil inclination will disappear. We won't have any more a desire for all these. These are all coming from impure impulses, which are coming from broken emotions. Emotions that are misfiring. When our emotions misfire, they're lost, and we're miserable. The people, when we have, who is happy? Which person? Find me one person who goes ahead and follows his evil impulse, and after he's done doing whatever sin they're doing, feels deeply at peace and meaningful in their life. You don't. You feel miserable. Why? Because it's not who you are and what you are. And it's not what God created you to live your life in this way. You feel really sick. That's what it is. But before, it's tempting. That's what evil inclination does. So now we can understand this fascination of free Palestine. Free Palestine really means keep the world in its sick, unrefined, and elevated state. But it's not going to help because the world is moving towards its rectification. Now let's go back to the discourse. The discourse says that the the nations are 70, but their root, when I say nations, I don't mean are 70 nations, which have godly potential. But the godly potential has been distorted as mankind has a bloody, sinful history. But mankind is working towards its rectification. The world is improving. There is a purification process going on. That purification and healing and rectification process is being driven by the Jewish people and the mitzvot and the Torah. This is affecting the world until we reach to its complete rectification in the Messianic era. So, but the 70 nations are going through a process. Those 70 nations were rooted in the 7 nations living in the land of Canaan, requiring the Jewish people to enter and settle that land physically, so that emotionally and spiritually this elevation and purification and enlightenment can take place. Okay? Now these 7 nations, what's their origins? The 7 nations which are rooted, just like the 70 are rooted in the 7. And the 7, what's the root of the 7? Unholy emotions, misguided emotions. What's its root? Its root is the tree of knowledge. Because the tree of knowledge is to know good and evil, which means to mix things up. There is a little good there, but the good is mixed with evil. Without good, nothing can exist. Because God is the life force of everything. There has to be a spark of life in everything, or else it can't exist. That's why every lie needs a little bit of truth to it. But it's good that is entangled and perverted in evil. In that tree, so had Adam and Eve not eaten from that tree of knowledge, then their consciousness would have been a holy consciousness, and all of their emotions would have been holy, godly emotions, and they would have produced offspring that would have all been in a very elevated state of consciousness, powerfully aware of God, their love, their might, their compassion, their power of victory, submission, bonding, kingship, which is the power to influence. All these emotions and all these drives would have all been holy and godly. But it wouldn't be our accomplishment. It would have been all a gift from God. So God had other plans. He incited a snake to go and incite Adam and Eve. They fell for the temptation. They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And as a result of that, they began to know good and evil, which means their emotions and Adam and Eve itself became polluted and contaminated. They started experiencing evil inclination. From love, from pure, holy, godly, selfless love, turned into selfish lust. And the same is from the power of intensity of Gevurah, turned into jealousy and greed and things like that, and anger and rage. And so too, all the other emotions. So it was the tree of knowledge that where's the root of the 7 nations. Now, what's with Amalek? Where is Amalek? The 7 nations are part of that tree. Now, by the way, emotions are compared to plants. Because one of the things about our emotions are they fluctuate. Emotions are in a constant state of fluctuation. Like a tree. A tree grows, doesn't stay. It expands. Emotions expand. From a small emotion, it can grow larger and larger. A small relationship you have with someone and you feel a little love towards them, a little attraction, it can grow and it become an obsession, become a massive, like a big tree. That's why tree of knowledge, is the emotion. In that tree was the root of the 7 emotions, but since it was polluted, good and bad, when man ate from it, it caused a misalignment in all of Adam's emotions, and therefore messed up his offspring, turned into 70 nations, rooted in the 7, which were the primary root of these 7 impure emotions. Pretty interesting story. Now, but where is Amalek? Now, Haman, in the story of Purim, he is a direct descendant of Amalek. But what did we say before about Amalek? Amalek is the beginning of the nations. He's not part of the nations, but yet connects to them. So that's why regarding Haman, the sages asked the question, what's his origins? Where are the origins of the Amalekites? Where are they rooted? What's their beginning story? Because the Torah is always the essence of everything. Let's trace it back to the Torah. Let's find the essence of it. And the sages say, Hamino it's from the tree. But hold it. The 7 nations are in the tree. Didn't we say that Amalek is when you say Hamino eitz, you're not saying he's part of the tree. You're asking the question, Hamino eitz, is he from the tree? Which means you're excluding him from the tree. By saying, by this, it's so amazing. I think it's so perfect. The sages don't plug him to the tree. They plug him to the word, which means, is he from the tree? To the question mark, is he from the tree? Which means we're negating him being of the tree. But it's not an absolute negation. Because if it would be an absolute negation, if he wouldn't have any connection to the tree, if he wouldn't be hanging around even the vicinity of the tree, you wouldn't have to negate him. By saying, is he from the tree, implies that he's got a relationship to the tree, but he's not really part of the tree. Brilliant. Hamino eitz, is he from the tree? Right? It's like, the kid that you find next to the cookie jar with all the cookies on the floor and all the crumbs. But you don't have evidence that they were in the cookie jar. But that's the kid who you say, for some reason a minute ago, we have you on camera being like within the vicinity. I can't connect you there, but at least I have you surrounding over there. So if Haman would be, if Amalek would not be at all anywhere within the reach of the tree, we wouldn't negate him. Hamina eitz from the tree is implying that he's got some kind of connection. So the answer to that is Amalek is the source of the tree. There is the tree, and then there is the source of the tree. From where the tree grows. So a tree of knowledge of good and evil, the unholiness of it, its seed, if you might say. Haman is not from the tree. He's from the seed of the tree. So what does that mean? If the tree is the emotion, a polluted emotion, what's the underlying factor that drives any of the dark negative drives of a human being? What drives the negative, the cruelty, the murderous drive in a human. What drives? If someone is a murderer, God forbid, that means they have gevura, the power of gevura, but gevura in a very unholy way. That's why they're a murderer. The sages tell us an interesting thing. The sages tell us that if someone finds within themselves like leanings towards spilling blood, if someone has fantasies of killing someone, they should find a kosher way to have that outlet. By doing what? They should become a ritual slaughterer for animals, because they're preparing food, and that's okay. And according to the Torah's method of killing an animal, it's in a way that is least painful for the animal. That's not the reason for it. It's the reasons of divine reasons. But you apply that tendency in that act. Or they should become a mohel. A mohel is one who does a circumcision for a baby, because it's an act that inflicts a wound. It's not being there. There's no mohel that's intentionally deriving pleasure from doing that. But the point over here is the person is involved in spilling of blood, but in a rectified manner. There is a time, I'll give you another example, when someone needs to be put in their place and they need to be rebuked. It could be painful. It's a spiritual form of spilling blood. But when it's called for and it's needed, you need to do so. That's holy discipline. It's holy gevura. If you're very soft, you can't do it. You need to create a gevura. So let's take a murderer who was a bloodthirsty murderer, like Amalek's grandfather. Esau was a murderer. He had a lust for killing, spilling blood. What's the underlying root where it's coming from? It's an overinflated sense of self. It's a powerful over obsession with I exist. And my existence is so important that I can erase your existence. Or any person hurting someone is you have such self-importance that because someone offended you, you have people who sadly, if someone dares cut them off on the freeway, what happens to me if I'm driving the freeway and someone cuts me off? If I'm in a very bad mood, if I'm a rush hour in a bad mood, maybe I'll mutter something like under my lips. I probably wouldn't, but maybe. Maybe I have a very hard time honking. I'm not good at it. My natural reflexes are not to honk. My wife is good. She can honk very quick, but I can't. So whatever, but that's what I would. Other people someone dared cut me off, like they'll go after, God forbid, and pull a gun and shoot and kill. They don't care if they're shooting a person, the family, children. You have these stories happen, on the news every day. And you wonder how in the world could that? I mean, okay, someone stepped over. How is there such disregard for another person's life? You don't even know this person. You don't know, what's with you? Even if they intentionally did it, but why? Well, this person has such a strong sense of I exist. I am. How dare you have stepped into me, even the tiniest bit? You deserve to die for doing that. Obviously, that's, we might say, overkill on the ego. Enormous. I mean, a normal, balanced person leaves room for other people and respect for other people's lives. But it's not. But that's only one manifestation of ego, of over obsession with, over conscious of self. You might say it. They feel themselves enormously, but the expression of it will come out in murder. Because that's the tendency, that's the chemistry of their soul. They're more gevura, more But there's other people who will act out ego, not in hurting anybody, but they'll act out ego in another selfish way. They'll act out their ego in an expression of kindness, but not a holy kindness, an unholy kindness. And that's, their ego, when a person feels lust and oversteps the boundaries of where love is supposed to go, and actualizes their love or expresses their love in a way that's not beneficial to the world, not beneficial to anybody, just fulfills their instant gratification. Okay? They want to feel good and want to have a pleasure or whatever it is. And based on that, they'll go ahead and do something very extremely inappropriate. They'll cheat on their spouse and so on and so forth. For what purpose? They're hurting, they're breaking their family, hurting their spouse, why are they doing it? It's because they're obsessed with themselves. It's because I need pleasure. I love myself. I feel myself very much. And if I feel something, I must have it. So the fact that their love goes unchecked, and it's not really called love, it's an energy of attraction. The attraction goes out of its space and it goes into something damaging and not good, just for the instant gratification of the pleasure at the moment. So again, what's the root of it? What's really causing it? Why can't they just dismiss it? I have an urge. It would be nice. Okay, it would be nice. I can see the pleasure. I can see the fun I would have. I would think the good time I would have if I would do so-and-so with so-and-so. Might be nice. But you know what? It's not mine, and it's not meant for me, and it's not what I'm supposed to do, and it's not the place. And therefore, I'm foregoing on it. Not every piece of chocolate cake I have to eat just because it's there. And therefore, I don't have to do whatever with every person. So no, it's not. Why can't they say no? But they can't get obsessed. Why? Same problem like the murderer. It's just that the murderer is expressing it as, how dare you step on me, in rage. Here, the overinstated self-conscious, the feeling of self is so intense that if this is going to make me feel good, I must have it. It's the same ego. It's the same I. It's just the expression is different. Other people will stop at nothing to prove themselves right. Every argument, they will have to come back 1,000,000 times to answer. Stop already. Leave go. No. I'm going to show you I win. Not necessarily hurt the other person, but I have to win. There's never an argument I can just, okay, maybe I was wrong, maybe I shouldn't have. They win. What? That's called netzach. Netzach is victory. But it's a misuse of victory. It's about your ego. And why do you have a person doing that? It's because they feel themselves so much. And that inflated self is expressing itself in the attribute of victory, which is perseverance. Now, it's good to have perseverance. When there are good things in this world that need to get done, and we know it's right, and we're committed to doing good things, but then we get lazy and we get tired and we have obstacles, we give up. But if you have holy perseverance, what do? It's not about ego. It's about the thing needs to happen. I need to fight for this cause because this is a correct cause. That's a holiness. If the cause is a justifiable cause, a godly cause, a true cause, that deserves to fight and win and not give up until you win. To come back 1,000,000 times until you get the job done, until it gets done. But if it's serving the ego, that's an inflated ego. So what do we see from here? That the underlying drive of all of the 7 negative emotions, I just spoke about 3, but there are 7 of them, is a overly obsessive self. And that's Amalek. Amalek is not the expression of this or that. Amalek is a super ego. That's Amalek. And that's why they're not the tree. That's the seed from where the tree comes from. Hamino eitz. From the tree. It's before the tree, but connected to the tree. All the 7 corrupt nations need Amalek to be at their epicenter if they want to stay corrupt. Because Amalek is that selfishness, the root of it all. That's why Bilam, who was a smart man, he said that the Amalek is the beginning of all nations. But in the end, the nations will be rectified because all the emotions that these nations represent, all these energies, could be rectified, could be healed. But the overinflated ego, that has nowhere to go. Actually, in order to rectify all the emotions, you have to deflate the ego. And then you can put the emotions in its right place. So Amalek has to go out the door. The other nations could be fixed. But we're going to see, and this is where the Mimer is going to explain, that a tiny little bit of ego is important. And that's the only bit of Haman that is necessary to be left over. And that's why we're going to learn that what the sages say, that Haman had grandchildren who converted and they learned Torah in Bnei Barak. There is use for a little bit of self, a little bit of self-consciousness. We're going to learn about that. But first, we're learning about the unhealthy ego, Hamina eitz, where all the negative comes from. So let's read. Wow, so much good stuff over here. It says Reishis Goyim Amalek. The beginning of all nations is Amalek. The Yaduat is known. Shazayin Umois, that the 7 root nations, Hemzayin Midos Royas, they are the 7 corrupted emotions. Shehem bepchenas eitz hadas tov v'ra, which is in the level of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Shenafal b'shvira. Now he explains, how did even such a thing happen? How do we have 7 corrupt emotions in the tree? How does even the tree, it seems like this corruption existed before humans did it. That's why God says, eat from that tree, you'll become corrupted. That means that this toxic material was there. What's it doing there? Who made it? That was God's scheme. God already made that. When he shattered the original vessels. It's a deep Kabbalistic concept that once upon a time, a long, long time ago, at the very, 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 very origins, when God brings the world into existence, even before the worlds are created, he already causes a accident, a shattering, a breaking of spiritual energies, so that the possibility of evil can be created. Now, in Kabbalah, it says that these were 7 ancient kings who collapsed. These 7 ancient kings are really lofty levels of spiritual energies, of godly energies, but when they collapse, they get convoluted and messed up. And they get concentrated in that tree. It's like if we might to say that the debris of those shattered vessels all fell into that tree. The tree was composed by those 7 negative shattered vessels, by the debris of the shattered vessels. Amalek, however, Amalek is above the 7 nations. V'nikra Reishis Goyim, and he's called the beginning of nations. V'zeu hamina eitz, and that's why it says from the tree, implying that what? Shuhu l'mayla min ha'etz, the eitz hadas tov v'ra, that Haman himself is above the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He's not part of the tree. That's why the words hamina eitz is a question. V'amnam im kain. But hold it. If Haman is not from the tree, if Amalek is not from the tree, so why is he called the beginning of nations? He has no connections to the nations. The nations are from the tree, and he's from somewhere else, wherever. I don't know from what. Why is he called the beginning of nations? Because he's way above them. He doesn't have any relationship with them at all. When you say something is the first to something else, you're giving it a special respect. You're making it primary, but it's still part of the rest. Like we said earlier, like the firstborn is part of the siblings, might be above them. And also, first of all, from this that we call Amalek Rashis Goyim, the beginning of nations, already connects Amalek to the rest of the nations. Especially since it doesn't say Rishon, it says Rashis. Rashis doesn't only mean beginning, it means beginning of. The beginning of that. Like Rashi says, Bereshis bara, in the beginning of the creation. So from the verse Rashis Goyim Amalek, we're already connecting Amalek to the rest of the nations. V'gam ma'achar, but also from the other thing, even from the way the Torah speaks about the tree, connecting Haman, which is an Amalek, to the tree, you see a connection. Because we don't just say, where is he? I don't know. Find him on a sailboat. We say, Hamina Eitz, is he next to the tree? Is he from the tree? You know, he's in the vicinity of the tree. That's the point. By questioning it, even though it is a question, he has some connection to the tree. That's why he says, from the tree, which is a question. If he wouldn't have any relationship at all to the tree, why is he even being mentioned together with the tree? Even in a question mark, even in a negation, the fact that you're negating it from the tree is a sign that he's not completely clean from the tree. He's somehow related to the tree. However, even though he has a connection, we still have to still recognize that he's not part of the tree. He's nivdal, he's separated be'erech min ha'etz, separated from the tree, to the point where it's asking, v'amar min ha'etz? Is he from the tree? Which implies that he's not from the tree. So we have to say he is and he's not, which means he's close to the tree. The idea is the power of Amalek is an encompassing energy to the tree. An encompassing energy means an energy that is still clean from something. It's still not particularized, but yet it creates atmosphere. So the 7 negative emotions need a certain atmosphere for them to be able to fester and grow in their negativity. It's like environment. That's Makif. Makif is environment. So Haman is not the tree. Amalek is not the tree. It's nothing. There's nothing particular corrupting. There's no corruption, but it's in a corruptible environment. He creates the environment that sets the tone for all corruption. You can't pin any corruption on him. He's clean from everything. But he just sets the tone for everybody else to be corrupted. That's the idea. It's like something that touches the tree but doesn't touch. Makif is surrounding, so it's there or not. They're both true. He's wondering, is he from the tree? You're saying, by saying from the tree means you're disconnecting him, but he has some connection. That's why we can use the term, we can ask about it. V'zeu shenikra reishis goyim Amalek. That's why Amalek is called the beginning of nations. By saying it's the beginning, you're setting him aside on a platform onto his own. But at the same time, you're also linking him with the rest of the nations. Shenikra reishis la means we call the beginning to them. V'afal pikein ein nimna imayim, but he's still not counted with them. He's not part of them. The shoirish advarim, and the root of the matter. So now he's going to explain it. What's the root? One opposite the other God made. Just like there are 7 holy emotions, there are 7 impure emotions. Same emotions. There is an emotion of kindness, which is really love and attraction. There is a holy kindness and a holy love. When we love in a holy, godly manner. When our love is appropriate to that which deserves to be loved, that which is true and real and deserving of our attraction and our love. And without love, would be nothing. There would be no relationship. There would be nothing in this world. So love is crucial for us to be in love with God. If we wouldn't have the energy of love, we would maybe know him, but couldn't care less. It would be horrific. The whole point is a love, a bond, a connection, a drive to connect. But it's not just God, it's all the things that God created for us to love. Hashem wants us to find another human being to share our life with, but an appropriate, godly reflecting manner. And that are guidelines. What is appropriate, what is not appropriate. So a man should marry a woman, and a woman should marry a man. A man should fall in love with a woman, and a woman should fall in love with a man. And then it should be exclusive. They should put all their love into their relationship and not squander that love, God forbid, leaving pieces of themselves loving other things, other people. I mean, you can love other people, but not in the same way you love your spouse. That's exclusive. That's mutually exclusive. That's a holy, godly way to love. And then if you're Jewish, you have even more instructions of how to actualize that love, which means within the relationship, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, when it's permitted, when it's not permitted. So these are all fine-tuning it to be godly. Love finds its godliest, most reflective of the divine. And the same is but then, of course, as we discussed earlier, there is dark love. That's not at all kosher, non-kosher love. And just like it is with love, as I said, there's holy discipline, there's holy strength and might, there's misuse of strength and might, discussed earlier. And so is all the emotions. So there's now, however, he's focusing on the 7 unholy emotions. But what's their root? What's the root of all of these? What's the environment that they need in order to develop? Their root and their source. Some in their beginning. Das. Das means really connecting something to yourself. That's the das. Das is when you say to know something, means to feel something, which means to attach whatever it is to yourself. Now, holy das is not egotistical. There is a self there. It's not egotistical. It's just a certain self-awareness, but in the godliest manner. It's just I am, and I exist within this magnificent world around me, and the das, the awareness of self, not the overly awareness of self, because that's when it's corrupted das. Just the fact that, so the das really is, so the das is there of self, but then the ability then to feel and to attach yourself to anything around you. So for instance, the two original mental faculties of Chachma and Bina, of wisdom and understanding, is just pure objective information. We have a mind, and through our mind, we become aware objectively of things. But they're not related to the self. So they're there. And then I don't feel it. It just is. So if we don't know, let's say if our das gets frozen, completely shut down, we would be utterly disconnected from everything. The das opens up to connection. What is it connecting? It's connecting us, because the das is the feeling of self which now connects to whatever it is that is there to connect. That's das. The corrupted emotions, the 7 corrupted emotions, have a das that's their das in general. By the way, das is called the key that includes 6, because the das is the key to all the emotions. Without das, we know we have no emotions. But in holiness, the das is very subtle, of self. Your main awareness is you're aware of everything around you. You need to be aware of yourself to feel anything around you, because you're feeling it in relationship to you. And that's why you can connect to it. The unholy das is a das that becomes overly self-conscious. And when the das becomes overly self-conscious, it becomes deeply obsessed with self. So immediately when you get to know something, you immediately are driven to satisfy yourself with that. Not out of curiosity and just interest and the desire to know, to connect, to be connected to what's there, what's real. Everything becomes completely about me and about what it does for me and how and again, there's a certain level where that's healthy, and there's a certain level where that becomes very dangerous. And that's the toxic. And that's what happened when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Their knowledge became corrupted. Their knowledge became very thick and dense. It became thick and dense knowledge where they become overly self-conscious. Feel themselves way more than we need to be a healthy human being. And as a result of that, it leads into all the 7 negative emotions that we discussed earlier. So, the Omnam Shar Shugarjuzum Mechanasadas, Shuhurak, as he explains, Hargoshas Atzmusai Biyoser. The unholy das is an overinflated self-awareness. An overly hyper self-awareness, where there is way too much energy in thyself. Alkain, and therefore, how does it now translate into the emotions? Oyev kol davar al toiv al nafshay. I become very, very much driven. Love over here means I'm attracted intensely to anything that will make me feel good. Forgetting about the objective element of it, whether it is good, whether it is right and good for my purpose, for reality, for the bigger picture, for everything but for the entire thing, for the entire program that we're all part of. But all that goes out the window, because when you become so obsessed with your own das, you can't think about anybody else but yourself. It becomes completely subjective. What you really become like, you become from an overly, I don't know, I just had this thought right now. You become like a big black hole in space that is sucking everything into self. And it's the most destructive force possible. I mean, I'm sure there's good reasons for black holes in space and the cosmos, but imagine that. The person turns into a powerful suction where the self sucks everything. And that's why every person you come into a relationship, you can't even keep that person outside of you and be in a relationship with them, because you suck them up in your black hole. And they become all about satisfying you, not about the relationship with them. There's no more person left, because you swallowed them with your own ego so much they don't even exist anymore. They only exist to give you pleasure. They don't exist for you to connect to them, to be in a relationship with them, only from when you can derive from them. These are the dangerous emotions. That's how love becomes completely antithetical to what it's supposed to be. But what's its core? Its core is that it's a black hole that is pulling everything into itself. This sign, and the person becomes hating for anything that threatens you, even the slightest bit. Okay, so something is threatening you, you can move to the side. But to become so obsessed with hatred, why? David Amazik al Nafshe, something that might in any way impede on my existence. And that's why when they ate from the tree of knowledge, Amar Loi, Hashem says to Adam, Mi higidlach, who told you ki erim ata, that you are naked? And suddenly they were uncomfortable with their nakedness. Why? Because before that they weren't feeling themselves. They were just feeling reality. So then when we're looking at the world, they saw everything around the world, everything around them. They didn't see themselves. They didn't notice even that they're unclothed. Suddenly they were so much thinking of themselves. And then when you're standing in presence of God, they weren't totally, they didn't lose their minds completely, but because they were so conscious of themselves, they were conscious of the fact that they're naked and they're uncomfortable with that, and in that experience. In the beginning, he didn't feel himself. And afterwards, they suddenly had a whole complete different type of experience of themselves. Shanikra yesh murgish biyoser. They're called a something that feels itself very strong. This is the root of all the emotions. But which emotions? Which becomes absolutely evil, ketaivis, like dark lusts, the kas, or extreme rage and anger. And it's all because of this intense self. Now the das in the human physiological, in the structure of the human being, in the body, The power of Chachma is in the right side of the brain. The power of Bina is in the left side of the brain. Power of understanding. Chachma is the power of creativity, of wisdom. Bina is understanding. And Das is in the middle, but in the back of the mind, back of the brain. So it's next to the neck. It's like inside the skull, in the back side of the brain is where the Das registers. So, but therefore, the closest to get to the Das, God forbid if you have to drill a hole, is from where? From the back of the skull. That's the Das. That's why we put the tefillin over there to rectify, to make sure that Das is going to be a holy Das. Or else the Das without the, can become. So, the hula mila oidif, the sham yoinik mepchenes acharayim the Das the kedusha. The negative Das, the Das of the Eitzah Das, of the tree of knowledge, which the corrupted Das is taking from the backside of holiness, from the Das of holiness. Pchenas klipas Amalek, that's the impure power of Amalek, shu pchenas hayesh, which is, as we discussed earlier, it's this inflated self. B'chutzpah. Now, what happens by Amalek is a complete disproportionate. If all of mankind became contaminated with this from the tree of knowledge, the primary effect, the primary root in people was Amalek. Amalek, because the nations are positioned in the different parts of Adam. Every part of his body and every part of his psyche becomes later part of humanity. So Amalek is rooted in the Das itself, but in the unholy Das that was now created by the sin of the tree of knowledge. And that's why Amalek is full of what? Amalek, every descendant of Amalek had an overly sense of self. It's like sometimes you meet a person and you realize you can't talk to them anything. They completely don't hear anything. They're only interested in self and themselves. Anything you tell them, they only hear it from completely just from themselves. I mean, we're all flawed and we all have selfishness, but sometimes it's frightening to meet a person that they're just completely drowning in self. There's nothing but that inflation of that's Amalek, and that's why they had tremendous amount of chutzpah. Because when you feel yourself so much, you don't feel anything else. So even if you're really small against somebody important and big, you're still standing up with inflated ego. The gases aruach and density of spirit. Gases aruach means sometimes arrogance, but the root of the word is density of spirit. Is when the spirit is dense. Dense makes it only feel itself. Dense. Shaloi levatel asatzmei klal, not to bend and yield. Gam neged kol oirer lekiyam izgala benefesh. Now let's understand something. These impure experiences, although we are now connecting it to a particular nation, we all have all these nations exist inside of every single one of us. So even if a person is a fine human being, not an Amalek, but we have little Amalek cells, and that applies to everyone, and the Jewish people too. Every person, we all have some of this. So how does it activate itself in ourselves? is that we're so blocked. We could, God forbid, become so blocked with self, and therefore we create so much chutzpah inside of us and so much audacity that even when what was one of the things about Amalek? The Amalekites, they witnessed the splitting of the sea. They witnessed the 10 plagues. They witnessed the greatest godly revelation, and yes, they didn't budge. They came out to fight the Jewish people immediately after it was just 2 weeks after the splitting of the sea, and the Amalekites came to fight. How dare you, after you see that Jews are being led by supernatural powers, by God splitting a sea and destroying the entire Egyptian army? What the answer about Amalek is, they're so inflated, they're so self-important that they don't budge for anything. I am. And a lot of times, sadly, we experience that we know in our minds that we should humble ourselves in front of something that deserves us to submit towards it. And yet, just because of arrogance, I don't want to move. Okay. So till now, we're learning about Amalek as a very negative feature. And as we said earlier, it's the environment for all the negative emotions to grow in. It's the platform for everything. However, over here now in chapter 21, he's going to explain that there is a usage for this in holiness. We can take a tiny little bit of Haman. Most of Haman has to be erased. But we could take a few stem cells from Amalek and use it, and it's beneficial in the service of God. How is that? He's going to explain. But in holiness, which is opposing the unholy, even though holiness in general, the staple of holiness is the opposite of ego. The staple of holiness, the identifying mark of holiness is that it is nullified to God. It is in a state of nothingness, because it's aware of truth. The unholy versus the holy is that holy is conscious of God, and unholiness is conscious of self. That's the difference. That's the primary difference. Yet in holiness as well, a little bit of Amalek, as we said before, stem cells. Some of the Amalek, a tiny little, if it's taken with the proper dosage, it can actually become an asset. And what is that? Yesh gam kein b'chinas Haman. There is a Haman. There is a Haman. Vu Haman the kedusha salukis. That's the Haman in the holy realm. And that Haman in the holy realm is very powerful when it's used in the right dosage. And he accesses the horse. He accesses the garment. He's very useful. That's Haman after Haman is rectified. In other words, in the beginning, whenever we feel this ego of self, this inflation of self rising in it, we got to take a hatchet to it. We got to immediately smash it. But after you deflate the ego and he's really, really, really broken, you can go back and say, what was that ego that I once felt? I think I can use a little bit now. When is that? When we need a little bit courage to do things and we feel, who am I? Like, why me? Like the Rebbe gave everybody the task to bring Mashiach these days. They said, you, and you. So I'm a little nobody. I'm a little shmendrik over here. After all these generations of giants and the greatest thing, I'm going to go do something. Let's say you have a plan to do something. And then you think to yourself, like, are you kidding me? Like, are you insane? Are you out of your mind? You're going to do something that is like going to change the world forever for all the tzaddikim? Who do you think you are? A lot of times we feel that way. Like, why are we even attempting? Why are we even making or anything? When a person could make a difference and you belittle yourself. So you got to make a phone call. You got to call your Haman and get a little bit of his insane ego. You just want a tiny bit to rub off because you need a little bit of that. Because that bolsters you say, yeah, why not? I mean, we're soon going to explain how little you need. Because it can only be taken in tiny, tiny dosages. So that's Haman after the rectification. Where do we find that it's possible to rectify Haman? We would think that Haman needs to be flushed down the toilet completely. Nothing left. Haman needs to be eradicated completely. No, the sages say that we know Haman was hung up on a tree together with his 10 sons. But by that time, he had some grandchildren. And those grandchildren who were the biggest anti-Semites, the biggest Jew haters, some of them somehow made their way to the Jewish people and converted. Like we find today that there are children of Nazis that convert. It's rare. People that were literally Nazis during the war, they converted. And they're full-fledged Jews. Fully kosher. Even though they were Nazis. Their grandparents, I mean. Haman was like Hitler. Yet, he had grandchildren who converted. And they were Torah students, and they learned in a yeshiva in Bnei Barak. Like the sages say, Mibnei Banav Shel Haman, from the grandchildren of Haman, Lamdu Torah Berabim. Here it doesn't say Bnei Barak, here it says they learned Torah publicly. But in another place it says actually where? So we see from there that holy souls came out of Haman. Neshamas Kedoshas, holy souls. Shenichlalu ba'or Hashem. They became absorbed in godliness and the light of God. B'chachmei Allah the Torah. If they learned Torah, they became absorbed in the holy wisdom of Torah. How can that be? If Haman is the epitome of audacity, chutzpah, that which stands in complete defiance to God. Now, if they studied Torah, that means Torah is wisdom, and wisdom is the opposite of Amalek. Because what's wisdom? Wisdom is in Hebrew, wisdom doesn't mean information. Wisdom is the power to be what? The power to know your source, where you're coming from. And as a result of that, be completely abnegated. Koyach ma, the power of selflessness. The total opposite antithesis of Haman. And yet Haman's grandchildren study Torah, which means they were rectified. Right? The opposite of the density of self that feels only self. Chachma is to feel a truth bigger than you and not feel yourself. So what's that holy Haman? Hainu kamoi. That's the idea of when it says Vayigba liboy b'darkei Hashem, that he raised his heart in the ways of God. It's a verse. I'm not sure where it comes from. I can check it up in the back. But there's a verse that says that he lifted up his heart. He raised his heart in the ways of God. What does that mean? As the sages tell us, sages say that when you pray, you're supposed to have your eyes below, the libay lamaila, and your heart has to be upwards. Simply, it means you have to be looking down when you pray, showing humility, but your heart has to be aspiring to heaven, rising upward. So now he's going to explain that eyes looking down means total nullification, total surrender to God. The heart rising up represents a certain sense of self-importance, because only with that sense of self-importance can you pray, which means can you allow yourself the indulgence of swimming towards godliness and holiness, towards light and spiritual pleasure and ecstasy. Because if all you can feel is your nothingness in front of God, then you just want to hide in a corner and remain insignificant. But Hashem wants us to step up a little bit. For that, we have to bolster a little bit of a sense of, I want to be there. But who am I? I want. And the I has to be felt a little bit, because that propels you to move, to seek what you want. So the sages are saying there has to be a balance. If you become completely full of yourself and you're praying only, because even spiritually a person can become spiritually gluttonous, and that's not too godly. When you want to experience, when you're praying and it's all about the self experience. Most of our prayer has to be, what we need to leave when we end our prayers should never be about my own experience. Oh, that was so delicious. I feel so good. It should always be about, now that I connected to my source, how can I be in fulfillment for what my source wants me to do? How can I serve my Creator better? That has to be the overwhelming consciousness at the end of prayer. It's like, what am I here in this world to do? Not, oh, that was so wonderful, the prayer. I'm so enjoying the fact that I prayed well. That's missing the entire point. The point is, I'm connecting to my source so that I can overcome my selfishness and devote myself to what God has of me to do in this world, to do what He wants me to do. But in order to be able to come to that godly, higher consciousness, I need to allow myself to step into that godly world. I need a little bit chutzpah to do that. Because if immediately I'm hit by enormous humility, then I'm not going to go anywhere in my prayer. I have to be able to say, I see that, it looks wonderful, I'm going there. When it's God's palace, where are you going? Why are you opening up the doors over there? Who gave you permission? Go. You become, there's an experience available, go for it. As long as you have your eyes below, which means your purpose of going in is for the sake of finding out or connecting to yourself deeper to a higher reality, so that you can serve God's interests on a higher level. But you need to have that balance between the chachma, which is the pushing you down. Now, the difference between the mind, the chachma's eyes, he's going to explain, is related to the mind, to the chachma element. The sages are called the eyes of the people. The function of the chachma is to bring us to egolessness. The function of chachma is to keep us self-effaced. That's what chachma is. Chachma drives the self-effacement downward. And that's the mind. The mind has the ability to objectively see truth and forget about self. And based on that objective truth, live accordance to that objective truth. So over there, it's more important about what needs to be done, what is right and correct, than about what I want or I need. It's about what am I needed for. So that's where the chachma plays a role. But you're not only connecting to God through your mind, you're also connecting to God through your heart. And the heart, and let me hold on 1 second. The mind Go back to the mind for a moment. The mind is the source of the spiritual water in the person. Water is very humble, because water always travels where? To a low place. So water drives us down, makes us humble. But the heart is fire. Fire is the opposite. Fire is an upward motion. Fire propels us to seek, to passion, fervor, excitement. There has to be a little self there. Without a self, there can't be I want. There has to be an I, or else there's no power in anything. So the sages are saying you need to have mind and heart when you pray. There's to be a symmetry of both of them, a synchronization of both of them. If it becomes all about your heart, then you lose, then you get lost completely in self. And then even your spirituality becomes selfish and self-serving. And the truth is, it's good for nothing. It's meaningless. It makes you feel good, but that's about it. It's not holy. It's not godly. So just the heart ain't good. But just mind without heart is also lifeless. So you need a little bit of heart, and the fuel for the heart is a tiny bit of that. You need to get some Haman juice. Tiny little Haman juice. Because the truth is, in front of God and in the presence of an infinite being, how do you even dare even feel yourself? How do you even dare say, I'm going on an exploration over here? We should be frozen in fear and in awe and in nothingness. To be able to activate the heart, we need to be able to say, I am, I want, I need to get close. Who are you? I am. How in the world someone feel himself? Okay, so you go to your neighbor Haman and get a little juice from him. Haman has enough to provide because he's full of self. So a tiny bit of self from Haman, as I said, a few stem cells from Haman is beneficial in our service. That's the idea that he's kind of developing over here. Again, so the sages say, our eyes have to be below, and our heart has to be upward. Our eyes downward. The eyes are the power of wisdom, relate to the power of chachma. As it is known, the wise men are called the eyes of the community. And they are the chachma, the power of what? Which is chachma, the power of self-effacement. The ein of lamata and the eyes below means upchenas habitul amiti, the koyachma, the real bittul of the power of ma, the chachma, which is the word chachma stands for the power of being what? Being not self. The stakola beyukara de Malchus, to gaze at the glory of the king. Achzeu upchenas chachma shebemoach. That's the mind element, the objectiveness in our service. That's the ma. Now, who epitomizes that power? That's Moshe. Moshe was the epitome of chachma, of Torah. Who is the ultimate eye of the Jewish people? That's Moshe. We follow him. He's our teacher. He's our eyes. That's Moshe. And by Moshe, what does he say about himself? He says about himself, I am what? So he personifies the what? The nullification. And that's why Moshe was a person who was always going down. He was humblest of all people. Because he was a total opposite of Adam after the sin. He doesn't feel himself at all. That's why he was humble from everybody. And that's why when God tried to give him the position of taking the Jewish people out of Egypt, he argued with God for an entire week. Kept on saying, you got the wrong man. I'm not for the job. because he's very, very chemistry was made up of the opposite of Amalek. If God would have spoken to Haman, he would say, you could not pick a better guy like me. Just the right man. But Moshe couldn't bring himself to do it. No, I'm not going. I can't, because of the humility. But excessive humility, had Moshe remained in his humble state and not picked up a tiny bit of self, we would still be in Egypt. So obviously Moshe needed to, at a certain point, have God forced him to it, but in the end he had to pick it up. Because the godly soul, which the godly soul is godly because it's completely self-effaced to God. And where is it? In the brain. However, the heart is a little different. Believe, but in the heart is also a Holy Spirit, but it's not called neshama. Neshama is the word, has in it ma inside of it. Nun shin, but also the word ma, neshama. The neshama has the idea of ma, which is the bittul. But in the heart, there's another part of the soul called ruach. Ruach means spirit. And the nature of spirit is that spirit is spirited, which is sha'oila, and which b'chinas ruach, the Asian fire, which travels upward. Sha'oila lamayla, that rises upward, b'chinas hagba visnasus, in a manner in which it picks itself up and it elevates itself. In contrast to the nullification of the mind. The mind is egoless, and if the mind is not egoless, then it's not much of a mind. If the mind is not objective, then it's not a good opinion. If someone gives an opinion, and you go to someone for advice, and they give you an opinion, and their opinion is subjective to what they want, then that's not a valid opinion. That's not someone you should take it. To get counsel is to go to someone who you know has no ulterior motives but the truth. And then you'll get good counsel. Because they can tell you what's the right thing. But someone who's seeking what they're gonna gain from it, that means it's not pure intelligence. It's warped by ego, by self. So the power of the mind is to see things for its truth as it is, without self. It's not about me, it's about what is outside of me. That's why the mind is the power of mad. It doesn't think of self, it thinks about what's real. Especially in relationship with God, it takes God for what God is, without thinking about what's in it for me. But if we only had that, if there's none what's in it for me, and it's just God for what God is, then we might never approach him. We would just become so overwhelmed by him and just be not. But the heart has a little bit of chutzpah to it. That becomes because of the thirst of the heart, exhibiting the characteristics of fire. Fire exhibits the opposite of humility. Presence, strength. Give me what I want. Fire is following its passion, right? It's bina liba, and that's the other power. It's the power of bina, which has a self already, and it goes into the heart. Al came bislavas alev lashem, and that's why when it is done in the right way, and the heart goes ablaze for God, yigbah halev, there is a little bit of an elevation of the heart, and bargashas atzma, then you feel yourself a little bit. Bagbavis nasus lamaila. by lifting oneself up and elevating upward. It's the opposite of the nullification, heder argasha, where you don't feel yourself. Mikol v'kol, where you don't feel yourself at all. And like water and fire that are total opposite to each other. And they don't work too well together. And yet when we pray, we have to mix fire and water together. So to the mind and the heart, they're two opposites. The wisdom of the mind is in a state of abnegation and descent downward. But the spirit, the eish and the fire that's in the heart, rise like fire. But the sages say, if you want to have the right balance in prayer, you need both. Your eyes should be downward, in an abnegated state. But the heart should be racing with excitement upward. Because what's going to happen if you don't allow the heart to be elevated? For it to rise upward. You will not be able to serve God because you'll look at yourself as a nobody. So if God wants you to go to Nineveh, for example, and go tell an entire big, huge metropolitan to repent, you'll run away on a ship. You'll say, who am I? You'll hide in the bottom of a ship like Yonah did. He was plagued with too much selflessness. And he didn't have that understand, that he's the messenger of God. So you go there and get onto a milk carton and make your announcement, speak to the people. You'll be effective like he was. Or like Moses, who didn't even want to go. All these people would curl up in a little fetal position, hide somewhere under a bench, and not do anything. How many people do not get things done because they feel they're unworthy of doing it? And how much does the world lose because of the people who are sadly too humble? No good. Now, because the person will say, Mi anaychi, who am I? That's why in order to be able to get things done, whether it's to decide that you're going to master knowledge, you're going to learn the entire Talmud, that's only if you're important in your eyes to do so. Or if you're important, right? Or to start a project, or to whatever it is. So anything that we need to get done in this world requires a little bit of self-confidence. To awaken, you need a little bit elevated heart in order to evoke the longing and the thirst. When a person is already in a state of desire and longing, one should allow that to take them to feel the light and to feel the energy. To feel it, and not shut it down because I'm not entitled to feel anything. It's okay to feel and to have a sensation, and now use that sensation and that feeling to motivate you now to go do good things in this world. Again, it's a very tricky balance because a lot of times when we do pump ourselves into our spiritual activities, it can very easily go too much into self, and then it stops being at all about what God needs of us, and even our spiritual lives become an obsession with self, with our own experiences. And then, for example, when people really need your help, a person can say, I'm sorry, don't bother me, I'm praying. That's disgusting. I'm not saying at a certain time that you need to pray And it's if you're not going to pray, then whatever. But to say to people that you're of course there's a certain obligation to pray, so we have to pray. But to indulge yourself in lengthy prayer when someone really, really needs your help, and you can afford to help them, then go help them. That's what God wants you to do. But if you're indulging in yourself, then I want to feel this is my time of ecstasy and bliss. That's very not godly. So the dominating element always has to be the purpose, the objective truths that need to be, but the ability to activate and get involved in this godly mission requires a little, somewhat of a self. But you also need to humble yourself by the Esek Torah. See, prayer, you give expression to your heart. And therefore the sages always say that after prayer you should immediately learn Torah. Because when your heart is, if one experiences a magnificent experience of closeness to God, and you're swelling and enjoying so much how beautiful your meditation went, and how deep you went, and how exhilarating it was, the sages say immediately afterwards, study Torah. Why? Because if you leave the prayer and all you can think about is how delicious it was for you, then you're going to become further from God, not closer. But if you tune immediately after prayer, and it was delicious and it's great, and instead of indulging in how good it felt to me or how good I felt, you immediately say, okay, that I got closer to God. Now, what does God want? That's what Torah is. Torah is turn the channel from self and turn on God's channel. Let him talk. You were talking during prayer. We were talking. We were telling God whatever you want and how close, and you were trying to now switch the channel and let yourself hear what are his interests. And that's what Torah is. So that's why immediately after prayer, it's the fluctuation. And Torah is primarily an act of objective truths, godly truths. Because the spiritual source of Torah, the divine source, stems from God's brain, from the supernal wisdom. Levatel, and it's particularly necessary after prayer. See, it's so amazing. You get this. Earlier we spoke about Amalek, who's just pure ego, negative, and completely, the entire being is ego. Here we're talking about a very subtle bit of ego that came from prayer. But even that, if we don't watch it, can become a source of self-obsession. Levatel. So you need immediately levatel b'chenes hayesh v'agba. So it's good to have Torah study after prayer to counter the self-importance, and the elevation, the b'chenes ratzei shebalev, where the heart got excited, b'tefillah, in prayer. Because the heart's desire to get close in prayer needs to be checked and needs to be countered with a sense of purpose and mission. Now we're going to see something so magnificent. Wow. It took more time than I thought, but let's quickly do the next piece. We're starting chapter 22. V'zehu, and this is what the sages say, Kitov, it says, Vayar Elokim. There's a verse that says in Genesis, when God created light, It says, Vayar Elokim es ha'or ki tov. That God saw that light was good. And the sages give interpretation. Because then it continues, God saw the light was good. Vayavdel Elokim. So then God went and separated between ha'or and ha'choshech. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, I'm wrong. It says, Vayar Elokim es ha'or ki tov. God saw that the light is good. And the sages say, what does it mean that God saw that the light was good? Good for what? So the sages say, God saw that the light was good to hide. Yeah, and that's why it continues that God separated between the light and the darkness. Because the light was so good, God wanted to make sure the light is preserved. So what does that mean? He separated. And the sages explained that to mean that God said, this light is too good to shine. I'm going to hide it. It means I'm not going to undo the light. I'm going to hide it and I'm going to conceal it somewhere. And when? It says God concealed it for messianic times. In the future, this great light that was so good that God said, I'm putting away for the future. It's like when you find something that's really, really special, you find a very special wine. So you decide, you know what, I'm going to put this away. It's not just open. I'm going to put it away for a special occasion. I'm hiding it. And you put it aside. So God saw the light was so good, he's going to put it away for a special occasion. But in the context of what we are learning, light is associated with love. Because the Hebrew word for light is or. Or, the numeric value of or is 207. The Hebrew, like the letters spell Aleph, Vav, Resh is 207. 2 times or, if you double 207, what do you get? 414. Which is the numeric value of the word, the ahavta, and you should love. So when God commands us to get our hearts involved, in the Shema we say, the ahavta, you should love. So when God is asking us the first verse of Shema is pure objectivity. Shema is an experience of the mind. Shema is the unity of God. Plain, simple truth. God is the only reality. Meditation. So it's purely, the first verse of Shema is an exercise for the mind, not for the heart. Immediately after that, now God says, you should, this one that is the only reality, is the reality of all realities. He is, and there's none but him. Echad, he is the only being in the 7 heavens above and the earth and all 4 directions. Now you should love him. Which means God is calling us to get our hearts involved. So the word in other words, till now it was water. Shema is water. Vahafta, fire. So the word vahafta, the numeric value is 414. How do I know so? It says so in Tanya. But now, let's just do it so that no one should think that maybe it's not that way. So let's do it. Right away in the word vahafta is a tough, so that's 400. And then you have aleph and a beis in vahafta, ve'ahavta. So aleph and beis is 3, so it's 403. Then you have a vav, ve'ahavta. So vav is what? 6. 403 plus 6. 409. What's the only letter I didn't say yet? Ve'ahavta. Hey. Hey is 5. So 409 plus 5, 414. The Alter Rebbe is right again. Ve'ahavta is the numeric value, 414. What's 414? 2 times love. 2 times or. So we see from here that or is love. And let me explain that a little bit. What's the connection? Why is light love? Because light is kindness. Light is illumination. It's the energy of kindness. And love and kindness is the same energy. Love is the soul of kindness. Okay, so once we've now come to the conclusion that light is love, could be a description of love or light. Now it says, Vayar Elokim es ha'or ki tov. That God said that light is good. The sages say, what does that mean? It's good. It's good to do what? It's good to hide it. So what does that mean? If we say that light is not just light, but light is love, it means it's good to hide the love. What does that mean? That that our love, which is expression of self, I love, needs to be coded with humility. And we spoke earlier, when the heart swells and it wants, what has to dominate over the fire? Get your fire extinguisher and pour the water on it. Don't extinguish the fire, but keep the fire always in check. Never let the sense of I in your relationship with God overtake you. Whenever you're feeling the I is expanding, you need the I because that's your motor, that's your fuel. But when that I starts getting a little too much about self, immediately increase the objectivity, increase the mind to keep them. When you pray and you felt yourself strongly in the prayer because you're building an I that's a holy I, but still an I, immediately cover your prayer with Torah study so that your I gets hidden inside. Let the subjective drives be covered by the objective truths, and let that dominate. But keep the engine burning inside. Keep that love burning. A little bit is needed. That's the balance. That's what he's saying over here. Toiv lignos, it is good to hide. Toiv lignos, it is good to hide. The light of the excitement of the heart that's in prayer. The excitement in the heart, the love of the heart in prayer needs to be contained. What should you hide it in? Torah, you got to hide it in the Torah. Oh, by the way, the sages say, where did God hide the light? They said he hid it in the Torah. That's actually the answer. They say, see, before we said, the sages say that it's good to hide, but they also say where he hid it. He hid it in the Torah. So now that we're learning that the light over here means personal, our love, we should hide our love in Torah. Because Torah is, again, objective truths. Torah, we get to hear what God wants, not what we want. It's the surrender of self. Like it says, how do you know Torah is not about you? Torah is udvarai ashasamti. God said, I'm taking my words and I'm putting it into your mouth. Don't tell me what you want. I want you to hear what I want. My words I'm putting into your mouth. Kemayim, like water, shemechabim esh, like water that extinguishes fire. We don't want it to extinguish the fire completely, but we want to keep the fire very contained. Veloy kiboy legamra, as explains right now, we don't want to extinguish it completely. Elakamayim razal, but rather, like the sages say, shetalmud chacham tzarich liyasboy, that every Torah scholar needs to have chelek shmini shebeshminis. You need to have an eighth of an eighth. What does that mean? An eighth of an eighth. That means an eighth portion, and then you take 1/8 of an eighth, which is sum total 1/64. A 64th portion of what? The sages say of haughtiness. Sages say that the worst thing for a person is to be haughty. But a Torah scholar, they say, needs to have an eighth of an eighth, which is a 64th measure of haughtiness. That's good. The simple reason the sages are saying that is because if a Torah scholar will not respect himself, will not have any, and therefore will do things that are kind of invite people to disrespect them, then they're not going to have influence. The Torah scholars are needed to teach and to guide. But if they cheapen themselves and behave in a very cheap way in front of people, they're going to lose the respect. So they have to carry themselves with a little dignity, which means they have to project a tiny bit of, not arrogance, but a little bit. And that's the idea of the 64th. But listen to the most brilliant explanation on this 64th, based on what we're going to learn now. And the sages say that when a Torah scholar has a little bit of self-importance, exhibits just the right amount, then it crowns him like a sas ume'atrele, it crowns him kesaasa l'shabulte, like on a shibola. Shibolas is not a kernel, a wheat, a stalk of wheat. So if you take a look at the stalk of wheat, on the top of it, you have a few hairs on the top that are like the crown on top of the wheat that grows. You ever see wheat growing? On top of it, it has like a few little, what do they call it? Small little sticks. How do they call it? The tiny, like little, not sticks, how would you call it? Like pokey stems, what? Spikes. What? Spikes or so. But that serves like a crown. So the sages compare that a sage needs to have a few of these because if you have the right amount, it actually beautifies the sage. It doesn't diminish, it enhances. Now, a sage is the epitome, the real meaning of sage over here means a Torah scholar. That means the person is an entire being of objectivity, totally nullified to godliness, because that's the power of Chacham. Yet, a 64th. Why? In Yavi'u it is known that in wisdom there are 32 pathways of wisdom. In Sefer Yetzirah it says that God created the world with 32 pathways of wisdom. And we'll soon understand where these pathways of wisdom come from. Why this number? That's why we have 32 teeth. The 32 teeth that we have are related to the 32 pathways of wisdom. And these 32 pathways of wisdom expand into the 32 chambers of the mind. I'm not a brain expert. Shebamoch doesn't mean in the chadarim sheba, doesn't mean in the mind. It means the 32 chambers of the brain. So I don't know the anatomy of the brain. It would be interesting to do a Google search and see if something comes up when I put in 32 something in the brain. But we know that the 32 paths of the mind, which manifest in the 32 chambers of the brain, from there it expands into the heart. And that's why the heart in Hebrew is called Lev. Lev is Lamed Beis, it's 32. The Alke Nikra Lev, and that's why it's called the heart. It's called Lefisha mekabel, because it receives, the heart is a recipient, malamed beis nesivos chachma, from the 32 pathways of the mind. Like it says in the writings of the Ari and the book of Eitz Chaim, when he speaks about the heart. Because in the heart is where the lights of Chachma and Bina conclude. In other words, the influence of the mind goes down into the heart. The energies of the mind extend into the heart. That come through these 32 pathways. Now he's going to explain how do you get 32. The brain is made up primarily of 3 powers, Chachma, Bina, Das. But Das, we know, divides into 2, Chesed and Gevura, because the Das is the root of the emotions, as previously discussed. And the emotions are primarily two main emotions, attraction and contraction, Chesed and Gevura. So the Das is where it splits. So Chachma, Bina, and Das. So it becomes, altogether, it becomes what we call 4 mochin. The Chachma, which is on the right side, the Bina, understanding on the left side, the Das that splits into 2, right and left, it's another 2. That's why the tefillin has 4 chambers. The tefillin that goes on the head have 4 chambers related to the 4. Now, ubechol moach, and in each one of these brains, so 4 brains, 4 powers of mochin, yesh ches, not 4 brains, but 4 mind powers. Yesh ches oisiyos are 8 letters, the Havaya Adna. God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is Hashem's name, is 4. But we know that the name is Yud Kei Vav Kei, but we don't say Hashem's name. How do we call it? We call it Aleph Daled Nun Yud, the way we would say Ado, which is also 4 letters. So 4 and 4 make 8. In each one of these chambers of the mind, so to speak, is animated by 8 letters of God's name. That's how you get 4 times. That's how you get 32. 4 times 8. Because Havaya Adna in Chachma, Havaya Aleph Daled Nun Yud, Havaya and Adosh, whatever, in Bina, Havaya and Aleph Daled Nun Yud in the right side of the Das, Havaya and the Aleph Daled Nun Yud in the left side of the Das, and the Chesed and Gevura. Count them, all these 8 times 4 is 32. That composes the spiritual anatomy of the brain, which I'm sure has ramifications on the physical anatomy of the mind. Sorry, that composes the spiritual anatomy of the mind, which has, I'm sure, parallels in the physical anatomy of the brain. And from there, it goes into the heart. Now, when it comes into the heart, it's another 32. It's received in the heart. So 32 and 32 is 64. So what makes up the main composite of the human experience, the mind and the heart, the water and the fire, it's 64. 32 and 32. So how much of that structure are we allowed to infuse with ego? How much are we allowed to let the ego in? Into one of those 64. One parcel. And that's perfectly enough. That's it. 63 departments, chambers, parts of it has to be dominated by Chachma, which is Bittul. One of those elements can have ego in it because that fires up and creates the self needed to drive and be productive. That's why the sages say 164. That's where he's taking this, how you get to that number. An eighth of an eighth means one of the 8, there's 8 powers. 8 times 8, because the 4 mochen of the mind, each one having 8 letters. The 4 mochen of the heart, the 4 powers of the heart, also with 8 letters. 32 and 32, 64. One of them, one parcel, is a 64. We once learned about this. Remember, we were learning the mystical significance of the 8 garments of the Kohen. We were learning about each garment, what it represents. So one of the garments we were learning was about the head, the hat, the turban that the Kohen wore, and the other one was about the belt, the avnate, which goes on the heart. It was on a Thursday night class. We went through these garments. So it's long enough that I forgot already everything we learned over there. But over there, the concept was discussed. Now, when you take the 2 of them together, the combined, the 32 pathways of wisdom in the brain and the 32 pathways of wisdom in the heart, 32 and 32 equals 64. Because 2 times 32 is 64. And when the sages say 1/8 of an eighth, it's one portion of those 64. Because 8 times 8 is 64. And when the 32 pathways of wisdom come into the heart, so again, the real bittul is in the 32 paths, not in the other 32. The real bittul is in the heart, is in the mind. But then, and the heart is full of fire. So you're starting off with half driven ego, but the mind has to dominate over. So the mind has to infuse the Lamed Beis Nesivas Chachma, has to infuse the Lamed Beis, the other 32 that's in the heart, completely take it over. Besides, one portion could be left with this rising energy. We have 8 times 8. The 4 mochen, when each one incorporates all 8, is 32. When they become doubled in the heart. This, by the way, gives me a secret which I've never realized till now. He uses the word when it doubles on the heart. And Nas explains to me that by the breastplate that they put on the Kohen, it was the one garment of the Kohen that doubled. And in between, they put the Urim V'Tumim. It doubled over and it was placed right by the heart. So you see the doubling element on the breastplate, which is probably the doubling of it is the twice Lamed Beis that takes place by the Choshen that goes on the heart. Very interesting. And the one portion, which is 1/8 of an eighth, this is not when you have 8 times 8. The Inyan Hu, and the idea is Talmid Chacham, a student, a Torah scholar, that's a radiance of the supernal wisdom. Shebemoach, that's in the brain. Bittul the Koach Ma, that's a dominating, powerful force of abnegation, the power of the soul to be completely selfless. And it's not enough that objectivity and that selflessness should be in the mind. It needs to come into the heart to extinguish the fire of the heart, Gamkein. Bittul v'shuv canal, to dominate our heart, that our spiritual aspirations should be overpowered by God's interests, not by our interests. But you're allowed to leave one portion of 64, you're allowed to leave for an experience of self. It's 1/8 of an eighth of the heart. So is allowed to be left for the heart to rise. Canal be in libay lamaila, based on what we said earlier, that the heart is supposed to rise upward. Because if you do not allow a little fire in the heart to rise, ein chibur lelev alamoyach, the heart will then not connect to the brain. Ki arei yadua shamoyach hu ikar. What does that mean? It's the heart's quest that raises the heart up to go seek from the mind. If the heart would not have that fire, it would never seek input from the mind. Sharei yadua shamoyach hu ikar shesham chenes chachma. The main seat of life is the brain, is the mind, because that's where chachma is. And from the mind it extends to the heart. But the mind only sends down its influence to the heart if the heart is seeking. And the heart therefore has to clamor. The heart, the emotions have to clamor for the mind, for them to connect to the mind. And the heart connects to the brain, into the mind, only when the heart first sizzles. The heart is sizzling, it wants, it's seeking. Because the rule is that no one influences unless there is something rising to stimulate. That's the concept that we learn many times, that every flow from above requires a stimulus from below. So the heart has to stimulate. But if the heart will be completely humble, it will not stimulate. The heart needs a little sizzle. Because only a spirit brings a spirit. And especially the spirit of life that's on the right side of the heart, it really is a student of Chachma. It must receive from Chachma, but it doesn't receive unless it first sends up a request for enlightenment. And that request for enlightenment can only come when the heart has a little bit of a chutzpah, so to speak, a broadness of self. If the heart has a little bit of that expansivity, with an eighth of an eighth, that causes the heart to rise and attaches itself to the mind. And then the mind can come into the heart and infuse the heart with truths and with nullification and so forth. And that's why it's a Torah scholar who needs this 64th. But if you have more than that, if he's a little bit more than the eighth of the eighth, important in his own eyes, then he's already called arrogant and shebelev. Then the heart is becoming too engrossed in self. And then the person becomes egotistical. And once the heart becomes infected with ego, then the Torah you're learning will not necessarily have the effect. In other words, the Torah is supposed to diminish the ego, but if the ego is from the very get-go is only an eighth of the eighth, then the power of the mind can very much keep it in check and temper it and humble it. But if the heart, if the Torah scholar allows the ego to spread in more than one part of this 64th of the human psyche, ego is very, very tough to break. And when it gets a little too intense, then even all the knowledge of the mind will not diminish it. Then you need to go to a doctor. Then you need something. I mean, a spiritual doctor. You need to go to a healer. You need something to break the person out of that mode. But as long as you have a 64th, ma'atrale is actually good for a person. And that's why it says actually the little 64th has to be similar. Like remember we said by Haman that it surrounds the tree. Over here too it says ma'atrale. It sits on top of the wheat kernel. It's a crown. It hovers on the top. A person needs to have like it's never, the ego is never supposed to be like embedded deeply. It's supposed to be like a little bit on the outside, like to lift the person up a little. Light has to be ego light. Nothing. Don't take yourself too seriously, but a little bit. Noigeya ve'enoi negeya. It touches and it doesn't. Shebeklipa hu b'chinas amole kaman chutzpah mamish. When it's in the unholy, when it's inside the Amalekites or Amalekis, by them, it's their entire being. It's real chutzpah. It's real thick, dense self. Shorish Amidas, it's the root of the unholy emotions. Ubekadusha. But when that's transported to holiness, Hubchenes Haman the Kedusha, it's a holy Haman. La'achar abirur, after we fix it. It's the confidence that's needed to rise in the ways of God. Any person that's being given a position of leadership needs to take a pill of this a little bit to give them the oomph, the courage. And this is actually the antithesis to the Haman of Klipa. Because this elevation, this confidence of holiness is also, just like we said, Haman is a darkness. He's a klipa. He's a shell. He's a impurity. But he is above the impurity of the other nations because he's not yet a detailed negativity. He's the general atmosphere that creates the unholiness to fester. So he's still above. The same is also in holiness. This confidence that's in the heart, the boost that the heart has, is above and higher than the emotions. In other words, when you're experiencing a love towards God, our heart is driven. So the love itself is a more specified energy. You're loving. But the surrounding energy that's pushing it, that's allowing the love to express itself, is because there's a little bit of confidence that allows you yourself to, like, you're saying Yiddish farginzach. You can allow yourself the indulgence to approach with that love, to chase your love, right? Elonageya, as it's above the emotions of Ava v'Yira Kedusha. Elonageya v'Einonageya. It's above them. It powers them, but it's still an entity on its own. Ki afal pishes nasa shalalev b'islavus hulamaylo mispilus Ava. Even though the confidence in the heart, with the heart being in, what I'm saying over here, let me give an example. A person who's crushed. Let's say a person goes through something very, very crushing. You're, I don't know. Person had a lot of prestige and a lot of, respect in their life. Something happened and suddenly everything was stripped away from them. And they find themselves really broken. So what you see is that since there's no confidence, they're just shattered, their heart. What do you see? Is that they can't love anything, they can't feel, and their emotions die. Until they heal a little bit, their emotions are dead. It's like, because there's no energy, you need to have a little bit of an elevation in the heart. A person who's poor and downtrodden doesn't go after things. It's like, because they're heartbroken. Not everybody that's poor is that way, but a person, at times poverty can lead a person to become so broken that there's nothing left in the heart anymore. So what are we seeing over here is, first, the conditioning of the heart is that a heart has to be rising. It has to be in a rising state. It has to have an elevation. And when it's pumped up, it can then have emotions. The emotions could could develop. So what he's saying is this elevated heart, which again in holiness is very subtle, but it's necessary. It's higher than the actual love that will come from it, but it's connected to it because it feeds into the love, it feeds into the fear, into the awe, it feeds into all the emotions have to have a little bit of this call it elevation or confidence to drive all the emotions. It's their root. When it is, however, only when it's a 64th. Then we turn over the page. Then it crowns him kisasa like the crown that's on top of the wheat kernel. In a crown-like fashion. Now we'll get a much better understanding. When the sages say Haman from the Torah, where is he to be found? So on the one hand, it means where is the dark Haman found? The dark Haman, the evil Haman, in the tree of knowledge. That was a sinful tree. And he's like not the tree, surrounding the tree, the seed of the tree, like we discussed earlier. But a deeper meaning. Haman in holiness, when we say Haman in the Torah, we say, where is Haman in holiness? He's minha eitz, he's around the tree, but this tree is not a negative tree. It's a eitz hadas, it's a holy eitz hadas. But it's still above the tree. The tree is the emotions. It's still above. Pidish Haman de Kedusha, the holy Haman. La'achar abirur, after he's fixed. Ukeniskala, as we said earlier. Shenamar amina eitz, when we say from the tree. Lamaylam eitz hadas toivera, above the tree of knowledge, good and evil. B'murgish hayesh, where you feel the something. V'nageya ve'ein nageya. Shehu b'kli paresh goyim. In unholy, he's the beginning of nations. Keniskalial. U'b'kedusha, and in holiness, hu agabas halev. It's the boost of the heart. B'darkei Hashem, in the ways of God. B'ratzei shebetfila. It allows the person to indulge in spiritual experiences in prayer and in the like. But since it's holy, it's only a tiny bit. 1/64th. It's only in that level that we can fix the Haman of Klippa, as we said earlier, integrate some of that haughtiness into holiness. And now we come to the last chapter that we're learning today. And over here he's going to summarize. Now we'll understand why Haman is the one who takes the garment. And why Haman is the one who gets the horse. So let's see. But and this last piece he's going to explain like this. In order for a person to go ahead and to take for themselves the liberty to reach for God's garment and to reach for God's horse, as we're going to see in Torah and mitzvahs and the like, you need to have a little bit of that chutzpah. You need a little bit of that when it's in the right check. It's interesting. When Haman asks for the horse and the garment, he's going to explain what that means in a moment. In Haman's statement, he never says, give me the crown as well. As I mentioned earlier, he doesn't ask for the crown. But the crown is implied. Because what does he say? Give me the horse. Let them take. He's not saying give me. He's saying let them take. If the king wants to honor someone, let them take the horse that the king rode on and the garment that the king wore when the crown was placed on his head. So Haman is not specifically asking for access to the crown. He's saying the garment and the horse that the king wore and was riding at the time of the coronation when the crown was put on his head. So what he's going to explain is like this. The Haman inside of us, when it's a kosher, when we kashered it, when we purified it, when we took it in the right balance, can get us access to the garment and to the and to the horse. But the crown, you can only touch with the Jew inside of you, not the Haman inside of you. For the crown, which is the ultimate truth of God, the Keser Shebe Orein Sof, the Keter, the crown of the Keser Shebe Malchus Shebe Orein Sof, that level that you can't take with ego. That needs total nullification. The confidence does lead you to very high levels. So he's going to explain. Let's read quickly. And this is the meaning that Haman was the one who took the garment and the horse. Haman dafka, it's Haman that is the one who's taking it. What's the garment? To stimulate, let's understand something. To stimulate God's garment, what did we learn is the garment? What's God's garment? God garbs himself in kingship. What does it mean he garbs himself in kingship? And the verse says, Geios Lavesh. Hashem Malach Geios Lavesh. God became king. He garbed himself in pride. For God to want to be a king means that God is exhibiting what kind of feature? Elevation, self-importance. God wants to be a king, which kingship means he is elevated among he wants to be served and dominating and a sovereign ruler over the people, which is an act of what? An act of elevation. Everything that we want to stimulate above needs to be done with a similar action below. So to stimulate God rising up in himself to be a king, which is the garment of kingship, the corresponding experience within us, Mordechai can't do that. Because Mordechai is like an extension of Moshe. He's like too humble. So it needs Haman to do that. It's pride and elevation, the melucha of being king, shebekdusha of holiness. That God became king. Geios lavish, he garbs himself with pride. What stimulates that? The Haman of holiness, the Haman of holiness. But again, la'achar abiru, when it's utilized after the fixing. Again, Haman as he is in an unholy way, you can't take a piece of him. He needs to be destroyed completely. But after the rectification and this, you can, if you might say, from his dead body, you can go get some stem cells. And from there, bring in some of it into holiness. After he's completely, which is in holiness, it means the confidence of the heart to be able to rise upward. That's why it was Haman that said, Yavi'u Levush Malchus. He was the one who activated this garment of kingship. It is in his hands. It's in his hands to bring this garment of this elevation. And what's the horse? And that's why he's also the one who gets access to the stable. Because if you ever take a look at a horse is a animal of pride. Horses are very self-aware of their muscles and of they're beautiful animals, and they carry themselves with grace and they enjoy applause. Betzalel Fleischman was telling me all about racehorses, and maybe somebody who listens from Florida who had the whole blessing from the Rebbe about the horses, they told me, will be able to confirm this. I didn't work too much with horses, but those who do know, a horse is very, very, very aware of, and it's because the name Sus, Watch this. You ready for something? The name Sus, the numeric value of Sus, is Samach, Samach, and Vav. So it's 126. The numeric value of Sus, which is Horus, is 126. If you take 126 and you divide it in half, what do you get? 63. 63 is one of God's names called the name of 63, Samach Gimel. It's the name of God's rising. When God rises to be a king, his exaltedness, it's related to the name of 63, God's exaltedness. 63 also spells the word gas. Gas means dense and thick and self-absorbed. So obviously in holiness, it's not self-absorbed in a negative way, but the feeling of self, that's the point. Gas. The horse has the name 2 times gas inside of him, double gas. That's why horses are very self-aware. From all animals, they have a pride. Now, there's regular horses that have somewhat pride, but then there is the horse that the king rides on. That horse is like Alexander the Great's horse. He knew he was the horse of horses. It's like this magnificent horse. Don't mess with the ego of that horse, right? So that's why Haman is the one who gets to go to get that horse. That its numeric value is sus. Kiteva hasus begeus. It's the nature of a horse to be haughty, vegasus, and to be self-aware. Uliyos pchenas samach gimel, they're beautiful animals. Uliyos pchenas samach gimel. Eliyos pchenas samach gimel u'inyana gasus. And since the word samach gimel is God, why? Remember, why samach gimel inflated of self? Because samach gimel, 63 is one less than 64. 64 is humble. When you have a 64th of confidence, you're still humble. But when you do a little more than a 64th and it becomes a 63rd, that's already a Haman arrogance, right? And there's a verse that says that kuloi sug, everybody became sug, everybody became corrupted. In this sense, it means everybody became egotistical. It's a verse in the chapter, not sadly, but for me, it's my chapter that I'm saying now in Tehillim, chapter 53. When I was reading it, the first I was saying, "Oh, sug, we got to work with the sug now." In any case, it says kuloi sug. Kishayesh, when is sag? Kishayesh yosim shminis. When you have a tiny bit more than an eighth of an eighth. Shechelik samach dalet. If you have a 64th, as we said before, of the main composite of the human intellect, emotional structure, then it's still humble. But it goes increases a little more. It gets a little. But the horse has got that. But once you fix it, when you take Haman, it goes up to holiness and it goes into the name of Samach Gimel of holiness. Now, the name of Samach Gimel of holiness is God when God is acting with self-pride. And the horse is Hainu base pamim Samach Gimel, 2 times Samach Gimel, Shubegamatri Sus. So it's obviously not every horse, but it's the horses that are mentioned in the Megillah, the horses that we're speaking about as the horse that God rides. This is the source, the horse that the king rode when the king was in his inauguration parade. If there's ever a moment when the king is elevated within his own mind, feeling on top of the world, is when he's riding on his horse during his parade. during his inauguration parade. We learned that there's humble horses as well. Those are the horses that are the words of wisdom. They're the agents of wisdom. But these are the horses of Malchus. Very, very prideful horses. There is a verse that says, on that day, there will be on the shadow of the horse. You see, when a horse is running and it's daytime, the horse gives off a shadow. Right? And you see the shadow of the horse as the horse is running and together with the shadow. So there's a verse that says, on that day it will be on the shadow of the horse. I forgot the continuation of the verse. The sages talk about this in Tractate Pesachim, and they ask, what does this verse mean? It says, that day it will be on the shadow of the horse, holy to God. So the sages are asking, what does it mean on the shadow of the horse? We're talking about the Messianic times. So they give three interpretations in the Talmud on what this means. According to one opinion, it means that on that day, God will increase Jerusalem to all directions as far as a horse can run until its shadow is beneath it. What does that mean? When a person or a horse or an animal is standing in the sun, they'll cast a shadow. But where will the shadow be? On their side, depending on where the sun is. If the sun is in the morning on the east, then the shadow will be on the west. Because what's a shadow? Shadow is because you're blocking the light. So that's what's forming the dark. So if the sun is shining from the east and you're blocking, so on the west side of you, there will be the shadow. On a person, it'll be the shadow of a person. If it's an animal, it'll be the shadow of an animal. In the afternoon, when the sun is on the west, the shadow will be on the other side because you're blocking the sun's rays from rising to the other side. But in the middle of the day, when the sun is right on top of the person, then the shadow of the person is beneath him. Hardly any shadow, right underneath you. Because all you're blocking is beneath. So when it says, on that day it will be, holy to God will be the shadow of the horse. So the sages learn it like this, according to this opinion. It's beautiful. That Jerusalem, which is the city of the holy of God, is going to expand in each direction of how much a horse can run from when the sun rises from the morning and it starts to have a shadow until the shadow is right beneath it, till midday. So a couple of hours of a horse running. In each direction, Jerusalem will expand. God will stretch Jerusalem out in all directions as much as a shadow as the horse can run. Obviously, you understand by just hearing this that there is phenomenally deep secrets on what this means. What is the horse's shadow? But now, based on what we said, we're getting perhaps a little bit. The horse is what? Is the self-pride. Self-pride creates a shadow. Because self-pride blocks God. The sun is God. The light from above, the godly light. The shadow is, the more pride we have, the more self-awareness we have, the more the more we're clogging and blocking God. The verse is saying, again, this is my own understanding based on, I didn't see this. He says over here that it's explained elsewhere, and I once learned about this, but I'm guessing based on the concepts that we learned. It would make sense to say that when Mashiach will come, the shadow of the horse will be holy to God. Because the ego itself will be holy. Because it will only be, seeing the horse symbolizes the arrogance, but then even the name Samach Gimel and all the derivatives of Samach Gimel, which creates ego, and so will all be rectified. It will only be ego that will motivate us to serve, not ego that will turn us into selfish beings. What it means exactly to the shadow is beneath the person, midday, and not on the side. Maybe that means an ego in check. It's not blocking anywhere. It's just beneath the person. It's enough. Again, I'm just guessing in it. But he's bringing that idea that kol masha asus ratzu meitzel k'mashkas makamach, like explained elsewhere. So this is the holy shadow of the horse. So now we'll understand why Haman is the one who takes the garment, and because to stimulate these energies above of God's exaltedness and God caring about his own pleasure in a sense, which is I'm sorry, that Hashem projects, no, not the crown, I'm sorry, but the garment of kingship, which is the exaltedness that he rises, and the horses, which are the vehicles that carry God, so to speak, which is his majestic horses, where he expresses his kingship into the world, his exaltedness into the world. To activate those things, which was necessary in the time of Purim, we needed a holy sense of pride. And that's the Haman is the one who has the keys to that stable. He has the keys to the wardrobe, so to speak, to unlock these features in God to bring them to us. Haman takes the garment as asus, but only the garment and the horse. Malchus, but the crown, that's not through Haman. Because when it says Vashanitan Keser Malchus Beroishoi, it says that which the crown was. It says the horse and the garment that the king wore when the crown was put on his head. It doesn't say that Haman should get the crown. And it also implies that the crown was put on by someone else. It was placed on his head. Nitel Momaila, it was given from Avila, Hisker mi anois, and it doesn't say who will give it. Torah, because it says by the giving of the Torah, it says go out and see. It says in the Song of Songs, it says go see the king, go out and see the king Shlomo, see the crown that his mother crowned him. The sages say the sages number one say that King Solomon, whenever he's mentioned in the Song of Songs, it's not Solomon, it's referring to God. And then the sages say that his mother, who's God's mother. So the sages say it's the Jewish people that are God's mother, and we give him a crown. But what do we see from here? The Jewishness of the Jew is not the confidence. Jews suffer from a lack of confidence in a sense that, instead of standing up and telling the whole world after thousands of years, bug off. All your sensitivities that you're having, it's all because we taught it to you. So just relax. We gave you everything. We gave you religion. We gave you faith. We gave you kindness and caring and so on and so forth. It's all Jewish ideals. And Israel should have some self-respect, like any other nation that would be attacked brutally and would do what it needs to do and finish the job. But instead we keep on seeking approval from everyone else because of a lack of self-confidence. And that's because the Jewish soul, in essence, is a humble soul. So to stimulate the crown, it doesn't come from an act of pride or confidence. That comes from our utter nullification to God. The opposite of Haman, the Jew inside of us, the Jacob inside of us, not the Esau inside of it. Haman is a grandson of Esau. Esau is the big son. Yaakov is the small one. The crown in God is, why? Because the crown of God is his exclusivity. And in his exclusivity, there can only be him, nothing other than him. V'hainu Knesset Yisrael, and that's the ensemble of Jewish souls. The sages say that God continued to love her till he called the Jewish people my mother. But what was the effect that we had to stimulate that? Our utter nullification of self. The nasa v'nishma, when we said we will do and we will hear, which is a non-self, not a self, but a non-self. Nishma v'nasa, koydem l'nishma, nasa goes before the doing. Shazeu kanal, shazeu ha-bittul l'maylam and this is a bittul, a complete nullification that even exceeds chachma, which is bittul. This is even exceeds that total. Ve'ein bezel u'mazel neged zeh b'chinas Haman klal, and corresponding to this level, there is no Haman. There's no equivalence to this in the unholy. This only the Jewish people have. Ki Haman u'b'chinas esnasus, because Haman is in self-importance. That's why when it comes time to actually do it, it says Haman went and he took the garment and he got the horse. It doesn't say he took the crown. But the crown being placed on his head, that role is affected, or that is achieved by the Israel quality, the quality of complete abnegation and humility. This doesn't exist in the world of Haman, and that's why Haman cannot go there. It is enough to those who understand. With this, we completed the initial desire, what I wanted to learn. And I would say this is like the completion of the mimer. It's possible that next week we're going to do, because the next piece begins to understand all of this with added explanation. He's going to give us some more, but it's only a page and a half, similar to what we learned this week, maybe a little longer. So maybe next week gear up for 5-hour class. And then chapter 30 really starts, and to get and understand all of this way better, it's good to know that there's so much more that we didn't learn, right? We know very little. We think we know everything after you learn a mimer like this. We find out that there's much, much more. Okay. Everybody be well. It was so good to be back again for Thursday class. Although I'm pretty tired. Maybe see Mashiach today.